22nd meeting of City Council of Charleston to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember White. Councilmember Shealy.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis.
Here.
Councilmember Mitchell. Councilmember Wagner.
Here.
Councilmember Gregory.
Here.
Councilmember Waring.
Here.
Councilmember Seekings.
Here.
Councilmember Shade. Councilmember Griffin.
Here.
Councilmember Moody. Here. Councilwoman Jackson. Here. Mayor Riley. And Councilmember White. So now, is this the first time I've made that mistake?
First time in 4 years. Okay.
No. Mayor Tecklenburg.
Here, present. Yeah, 30 years. Old habits can be hard to break, y'all. We're going to have a fun meeting tonight. If you would like to join us, Councilmember Seekings will lead us in an invocation and pledge of allegiance.
Deep breath, please. Heavenly Father, make each of us an instrument of your grace. Weave us into a community showing forth your wisdom and tenderness. Bless us all in our differences and support our courage to stand together. We call on you today to gather us in your divine spirit. Lead us as we lead. Protect us and our children and guide us down that path of truth and justice. In the name of Jesus, let us now put forward and act in the love of God. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I know most of y'all know this, but just in the event we need to evacuate the building, these are our two exits out of this room, and there's a door off the room to my right. Do not use the elevator in that event if we had emergency evacuation, but use the two stairways and then the single stairway out to the front. Just wanted everybody to be aware of that. So first I'd like to do a presentation, a recognition of an award, the 2018 Green Fleet Award to Holy Spokes, our city-sponsored bike share program. I'd like to ask our Holy Spokes bike share partners, Sean Flood and anybody on his team with Gotcha, and Anton Gunn with the MUSC, and any of your team members, as well as Landon Masters and Benjamin Kessler with Palmetto Clean Fuels Coalition, to join me up here on the podium for a little presentation. To let y'all know, Holy Spokes is our local bike share program, which is a partnership between Gotcha, MUSC, and the City of Charleston. It was recently announced as a recipient of the 2018 South Carolina Green Fleet Leader Award. The award, which is presented by Palmetto Clean Fuels Coalition, is an initiative of the State Energy Office and given to organizations that demonstrate leadership and excellence in clean transportation and alternative fuel activities in South Carolina. Additionally, the award recognizes local groups who acknowledge the environmental, economic, and national security benefits of reducing consumption of fossil fuels and who have implemented programs and initiatives to lower the use of traditional transportation fuels. This impacts sea level rise over the long run, y'all. So as I'm sure you'll agree, Holy Spokes is certainly a deserving recipient. The partners up here, and I'd like to invite them to say a few words, but first I want to share a couple of numbers for 2018. More than 111,000 trips have been taken on Holy Spokes bikes since the program's launch. More than 28,000 members have joined the program. Over 234,000 pounds of carbon have been reduced, and $154,000 in vehicle expenses have been saved. So please congratulate them. And first I'll call on Sean Flood with Gotcha to come and make a few remarks, and then Anton Gunn. Sean? Congratulations.
Thank you. Hi everybody, I'm Sean Flood. I'm the founder and CEO of Gotcha, the operator and owner of Holy Spokes. We are very excited to be here as as the mayor said, this has been a wildly successful program, but it's a success because it's a true partnership. We've since at Gotcha launched 50+ systems around the country, and I use Charleston, our hometown, as an example all the time. It took leadership and wisdom from the council with, Mike Seeking's years before I moved to Charleston, having interest in it, and Mayor Tecklenburg and your team now have supported it so deeply for the past 2 years, and our partners at Charleston Moves who have kind of advocated for it. And then you look at the step up by MUSC to really come to the table and fund the program because it aligned with their mission. We're an example for the rest of the country, because I'll tell you, as I travel around all the other cities, they don't all get it. And this has been a real transportation initiative, and a healthy one and a sustainable one for our city at a time when we launched that Charleston, I think, was voted the worst place to cycle anywhere in the U.S. And we proved it wrong with over 120-something thousand trips. And that's not just tourists, that's residents of the city of Charleston stepping up and riding a bike. So we're excited. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I will say, hopefully this is just the beginning of what we want to do in the city of Charleston, but thank you.
Yes, sir. Congratulations. Anton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. It's a pleasure to be here. A lot of people know my role at MUSC as the Chief Diversity Officer, but most people don't know I actually have a second title, and that is the Executive Director of Community Health Innovation. And that is how we move ourselves as a health system to focus on the things that actually contribute more to your health outcomes than just the medical care. We are very well and experts at delivering the clinical services, but that's a small portion of what actually determines health. Your built environment, how you exercise, the emissions, the quality of the air that you breathe in the community that you're in are important things that impact your health. And so for us, this partnership is a critical way that we drive innovation as a health system to think about health broader than just getting services when you come inside of MUSC. So this partnership is critical to us. We hope to have more partnerships like this. It's been very meaningful for us to see the amount of ridership, the number of people who have been spending time with Holy Spokes as a part of this partnership. So we hope to grow up and hope to continue to invest in it. But a big part of this is making sure that we focus on the next step, is that we got more people riding, but we got to focus on safety and making sure that people are safe as they ride throughout the city. I moved here 5 years ago from Arlington, Virginia, where there's a bike path everywhere. And so everybody understands the rules of the roads with bike riders and people who are driving cars. And so part of this partnership is we grow the amount of people who are taking alternative modes of transportation to reduce emissions, that we continue to invest and build a safe way for them to be able to do so and enjoy all parts of our city. And so we're grateful for this partnership, to the mayor and all of your leadership for helping us to do this innovative partnership, and we hope to do more soon. Thank you.
South Carolina Energy Office.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Landon Masters, and I'm one of the co-coordinators with Ben here for the Palmetto Clean Fuels Coalition, which is Office of Regulatory Staff's Energy Office initiative. It is actually one of over 100 coalitions throughout the entire United States. A Clean Cities Coalition that's focused on alternative modes of transportation, reducing our dependence on foreign oil, and using more domestic sources of fuels. Of course, taking a bike and using a bike share program, you can see that as taking one vehicle off the road, one vehicle that's not going to be parking in your parking garages, in your parking lots. They are taking a more sustainable form of transportation. So we see that as reducing the use of our traditional, and I'll put that in quotes, transportation fuels that is changing ever so rapidly here, especially in our state. So also the bikes, I wanted to mention too, that they're using them for first mile, last mile trips. Now there's folks that may not have access to a vehicle, or they may need some other alternative form of transportation. We see that as a very positive thing for our state. So we'd like to present the award to all those partners that help make this happen here in Charleston. The Green Fleet Leader Award for 2018 to Holy Spokes Bike Share Program.
So I also want to recognize Keith Benjamin. Y'all all know Keith, I think. He's our Director of Traffic and Transportation, who makes this partnership work on the city end. And Anton and all you do for health, they are a great partner of the city's for our health and wellness program, as well as providing now a teleclinic, a TV clinic at our homeless navigation center. Our partnership with MUSC is really remarkable. We thank you for all you do for our community. But thanks to y'all. Congratulations on this award. All right. So without further ado, we have some public hearings tonight. I think we have 5 items for public hearing. And I would ask that citizens who come forward to speak on these matters stay on point to the topic as they're presented, and a limit of 2 minutes for each set of remarks. And if you would give your name and address before making your remarks, that would be great. Mr. Morgan will introduce each item, and then we'll ask the public if they'd like to make any comments.
Budget first.
Oh. The first is, well, it's part of our public hearings as well, so Mr. Morgan won't do this. This is just a general, number one is a general input on our city budget for 2020, for next year's budget. If anybody has any comments they would like to make about our city budget, please come forward. Ms. Bryant, you can welcome to go first.
I came here actually just for this reason. On the 7th, Anthony G. Bryant, 2123 Cortland Avenue, Charles, South Carolina 29403 since 1968. You asked that question. On October 7th, I received from the Supreme Court finally Anthony G. Bryant versus the Department of Education. And my writ of certiorari was denied, and that was the purpose of the work I was doing to get that denial. So I can talk about the real issues within this budget regarding education finally. In terms of the budget, the Planning and Enabling Act provides for public health, public safety, growth and prosperity within the budget. Well, DHEC provided permitting uses for the area. And so in 2001, a map was done on the enterprise zone. This map was supposed to provide for affordable housing, all these good stuff. Didn't happen. The economy went bad. Then, like 2017, all the TIF districts you talked about on the Coppers Company Incorporated EPA 2017, I made a public comment there, on all the TIF districts you got going on you're talking about, and the lack of money thereof back into the community that we need money for, and particularly for education, of our young people that are deemed to be wearied by the Justice Department, with 10,000 students arrested in the state of South Carolina in 2017 alone. And so these documents on the record now within the budget. And so we hope now that we can focus our attention on some real issues in terms of race, right? Because we talked about race at the water systems, and Keith had to call for the question on some issues, Waring, and who's a 21st century leader in my opinion, in terms of infrastructure improvements, the Ports Authority and other entities who benefit greatly from our community, and intended beneficiaries of program and activity that haven't benefited. That's the question to me. Will that be the conversation with the city of Charleston in 2020? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Always.
Don't want to leave that.
Thanks. I'm Katie Zimmerman, Executive Director of Charleston Moves, and I'm here. Y'all already heard this from me last time, but I'm just here because it bears repeating and because there's a public hearing on it. The budget, I just want to reiterate, the Bike Ped Advisory Committee did put in 5 suggestions in no particular priority order, but it's very important that we have your strong consideration of those 5 items start being included with annual allocations each year. It's so important, and frankly, it was not purposeful, but the setup couldn't have been better to have Mr. Gunn say what he did about the importance of infrastructure and starting to leverage what you all put in to the county government and their requests. Having the city have a little bit of dollars to put in to leverage against that helps move these things forward. Connectivity and safety is so important for our community. You all know this. You've heard me repeat it a billion times. So please, please, please consider those 5 items for inclusion starting in 2020.
What are those 5?
Sorry, the 5 items are an annual sidewalk maintenance program, preferably on par with what the city of Greenville just did. Greenville's kind of killing it, y'all. They're really doing a great job. Also starting to set aside some money for the Ashley River crossings. So we're looking at the Ashley River Bridge, but there's also the North Bridge that needs to be examined in partnership with the city of North Charleston. There's also the James Island Connector, and there's also the Wapu Cut. And separately, Charleston Moves has a package that we can suggest to you all to start looking at. And then there's also the mobility manager that I know Mr. Benjamin has asked for in the past, and that person is very, very, very important. And also regular funding for the low line to get that started. That's an important item as well. So I think I hit the 5, but I might have left one out. Right. Thank you.
Thank you much. Yes, sir.
Evening, Mayor, City Council, Muhammad Idris. Racism is dead, and we are getting rid of the smell of racism by removing J.C. Calhoun, the architect of racism, from 80 feet in the air between 2 churches and burying it 6 foot in the grave. We believe that this will save money in the budget for the taking care of J.C. Calhoun, the architect of racism, by removing him, and we could take that money that you are asking and put it toward the police station. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, my name is Tom Bradford. I live at 18 State Street, a couple blocks from here. I'm a founding member of the board of the Friends of the Lowcountry Low Line. I appreciate the deliberations that the City Council and all the members of the staff of the city are going through to figure out how this partnership is going to go forward. I just want to report to you tremendous progress in how we're going to take this partnership to the citizens of the city. We're very excited about the work that we're doing, and we urge you to continue to work expeditiously to help us out. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Timmy Finch. I live at 153 Bull Street, downtown Charleston. I'm here to voice support for those 5 items that Ms. Zimmerman brought to your attention with regard to mobility and safety throughout the Charleston area. As somebody who rides a bike and walks and encourages other people to do so within Charleston and actually wherever they go, safety is a huge, important issue for me. As I make my way around the city and throughout the Lowcountry, there's some cities and some municipalities that seem to be taking a better lead as far as bike lanes and safety. And I think this opportunity to put the money into these initiatives for the city is important, and please consider it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Marcus Stevenson. I represent Holy City Wellbeing. We're seeking the consideration of your community assistance grant. This grant will actually fund workshops here in the Lowcountry around wellness, activity action plans that will focus on trauma, stress, depression, anxiety, and grief, and we're seeking your consideration. This is my colleague and board member, Lloyd Hale.
Good evening. My name is Lloyd Hale. I am the Assistant Director of South Carolina Share, which is the largest mental health nonprofit organization in the state of South Carolina. And I fully support Holy City Wellbeing and its mission to bring the whole health and the Wellness Recovery Action Plan information to the Lowcountry. It's been beneficial to myself and as I live in my life, and I've seen it help in my 15 years of work with mental health all over the state of South Carolina. So I fully support that.
Hello, Suzanne Hardy, 32 Pralo Street. I am a member of the Unitarian Church downtown and also a member of the Charleston Area Justice Ministry. And on behalf of CAJM, we want to applaud Council for their leadership in conducting the racial bias audit. We thank you for that. And for leading our region in funding affordable housing. Now, we know that additional funding is needed both to implement the recommendations from the audit with integrity and also to provide the needed funding, the needed money for the Regional Housing Trust Fund. Our community, CAJM, really wants to make sure those programs are funded. Now, on November 4th, the evening before Election Day, over 600 of our people will gather at St. Matthew's Baptist Church in support of those efforts. These people come from 30 congregations, which represent over 30,000 people in our city. Some of you will be there, we know, and all of you are invited. Now, we're calling on all of you to allocate our tax money toward implementing the recommendations of the police audit and also putting money in the Regional Housing Trust Fund. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address council. My name is Alyssa Lito, and I'm the Director of Charleston Pro Bono Legal Services. I have come before you the past several years to encourage you to support Charleston Pro Bono's grant application under the Community Assistance Grant, which was submitted in July. Charleston Pro Bono is a legal aid nonprofit. We provide free civil legal aid. So that's going to be landlord, housing, family law, estate planning, anything that is the civil realm, and it is provided to low-income residents here in City Charleston at no cost to them. In 2017, this council provided the seed money that helped us start a housing court and a housing attorney. Last year in 2018, that housing attorney had a 97% success rate on her eviction defense. So our attorney is killing it, and it's in thanks in part to city money. So in 2018 and 2019, we utilized funds from the Community Assistance Grant to have outreach programming. We use these outreach opportunities with our nonprofit partners throughout the city of Charleston to reach hundreds of residents on a variety of legal issues. We understand there's a justice gap in this community. If you don't have the money to hire an attorney, you're effectively shut out from the court system, and that's just not fair. So what we do is we come in and we provide educational opportunities. Not only can we respond when a crisis arises, but we could also proactively address these issues. We could have landlord-tenant educational seminars where we explain to a tenant, this is your lease document and this is what it means. This is what you have to do to request help. When we educate the population, they are better prepared to advocate for themselves and have more success in defending unnecessary and unmeritorious claims. So again, I would urge you to continue to support Charleston Pro Bono Legal Services, and we service the low-income residents of the city of Charleston. Thank you.
Very much. Ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sylvie Bale. I live at 1 Lenox Street. I've spent probably the last 10 years riding my bike in Charleston, and I've watched it get progressively less safe. I'd really like to see the inclusion of the line items that were mentioned previously that would make cycling and pedestrians safer in Charleston. I think that the projects like the Low Line and having a dedicated mobility manager are really important, and that they would help bring Charleston forward and enjoy some of the economic and social benefits of having safer streets. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other comments about our budget? Well, we'll move forward to number 2. Now, Mr. Morgan will make a presentation about this next item. Mr. Morgan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. First item under the rezoning public hearings is the request for an ordinance amendment at Maybank Highway and Bohicket Road, which is at present a PUD and would continue to be a PUD. This is an amendment to this PUD in this location. To orient you to the site, of course, this is Johns Island. This is, Maybank Highway is running east-west, roughly in there, and Bohicket Road is the north-south road that curves around to the top of the property. The Angel Oak Park is the green square in the middle of the site, and then there are other parcels that are owned by various entities. I'll show you a map that shows who owns all of those. Here's an aerial view of the site, the overall PUD area. Then we have a zoom in. I'm going to come back to this one. So to the far left is the subject property, the Sea Island Comprehensive Healthcare property, and the front portion of that, and I'll show another image that shows the exact portion of the property, the 2.8 acres that is subject to the change in the PUD. Then to the north is the Angel Oak Park LLC ownership area, which is part of the conserved areas now. And then to the east is the Lowcountry Open Land Trust property, and then surrounding the Angel Oak Park is the City of Charleston portion of the PUD. And of course, that is a conserved area. This is the existing PUD that is already in place, has been in place for a good while. It does allow for a lot of residential development, but as you know, it was bought out by these conservation organizations so that it would not have all of this residential development. The minimum affordable housing on the site is 10% minimum. The maximum is 15%. Of course, the amendment you're going to see that you're seeing before you tonight allows for all affordable housing on this particular location. There are also areas for conservation around the Angel Oak, mixed-use office and residential, and those are mostly taken up with the conserved lands. And there would be a 10-acre minimum of open space, which of course would be exceeded. The proposed amendment removes the general office area on the Sea Island site from the plan map and replaces it on 2.7 acres with a newly created DR2F designation, which allows for an affordable housing development. There would also be a slight reduction in the buffer along Maybank from 75 feet to 50 feet. The overall residential units on the site would be unchanged, but of course those are they are essentially non-buildable on conserved lands. Affordable housing requirements are unchanged, but what would go on the Sea Island Comprehensive Healthcare site would go a long way to meeting the requirements over the overall PUD, and the open space requirements are unchanged. The document that is shown here, you all have in your packages, and it shows the changes to the PUD to that 2.7 acre area to allow the 72 dwelling units on that site. Here you see that outlined in red. The GO that was there in the current PUD, that would be replaced with this DR2F that would allow for the 72 units. The rest of the PUD would be unchanged. And here's a closer image of the 2.7 acres and the 50-foot buffer that would be along Maybank Highway. And I just wanted to show a couple of things from our Johns Island community plan that shows that this is in one of the key centers along Maybank Highway. It's also very closely located to a lot of other services that creates a very walkable environment. It also is in our Century 5 plan as a location that could be for denser development. And I'm just going to go back to this image that shows all of the things that are nearby. Oops, here we go. So with the inner circle there is a 5-minute walk. The outer circle is a 10-minute walk. And I'm just going to step up here and show you that the 5-minute walk at this site, there are parks, a grocery store that's about a 5 or 6-minute walk away, a CVS, a library, middle school, a future elementary school, and a city park. So very conveniently located to a lot of other services, very walkable mixed-use area is potential here. The Planning Commission reviewed this. They recommended for approval. They did have some conditions on that. You have a memo in front of you that lists those conditions. I'll read these off to you again. And this involves the PUD committing to meet the stormwater management requirements of the city stormwater design standards manual. Also that in reference to easements when required for drainage or sewer for the area to be subdivided have to be of the width necessary to permit proper construction of drainage facilities based on drainage maintained or replaced where possible or feasible. And then also in reference to access, the PUD commits to meeting the required sidewalk width established by the Maybank Highway Overlay District, which is in process with the city and the county that would be calling for sidewalks and bike and pedestrian trails along Maybank. So that PUD would commit to meeting that in the area out front that would potentially be in the buffer that would go in front of the building. And with those conditions, our Planning Commission recommended approval 6-0 for this PUD amendment.
Would anyone like to be heard on this matter? Please come forward.
Mayor Tecklenburg, members of council, I'm Danny Forsberg from Forsberg Engineering, speaking on behalf of Sea Island Comprehensive Healthcare. I don't have much to add. We were able to get the support of Coastal Conservation League, which is not easy to get for any type of development, but we were able to get their support. We also had at least no opposition, at least from Lowcountry Land Trust, who owns the land around this project, which has now been put into conservation easements. We're working with them. They hold some easements on this property that were established when the PUD was done about 12 years ago. We've proven to them that we're not going to be damaging anything as far as drainage. We are adopting some elements of the Dutch dialogue. I participated in that approximately a week-long session at the request of the city, or volunteered to come in and talk to people there. We are very fortunate. This land is elevation 17 and 18 above sea level. And part of Dutch dialogue is develop on upper lands and let it work its way down. We're blessed with very permeable soils. I believe we've already had the testing done. The soils there can support percolation rates in the range of 10 inches per hour. So our goal is to implement as many things out of the what's called low impact development techniques for the development of this property, and we're asking for your support.
Thank you, sir. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Jason Crowley, Director of Communities and Transportation with the Coastal Conservation League. You already heard from Mr. Forsberg.
Pose for pictures.
The Conservation League does support this amendment because it is in keeping with the Johns Island Community Plan and the recommendations from the Dutch dialogues. We do hope that as this continues to move through the process, though, that the city and the applicant are working together to ensure that there is indeed good connectivity for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, not just across Maybank Highway, but around to the city park as well as some type of restrictive covenant or contract that there is permanent affordable housing on this property. There is a need for affordable housing on Johns Island, as we all know, and this will provide it, and we want to make sure that it doesn't disappear. But otherwise, we are in support of this project. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Leon Burton. I'm the administrator of Sea Island Healthcare Corporation. Sea Island has been in existence, for most of you know, for more than 40 years. And its primary mission has been always is to deliver quality health care and human services to the residents of the Sea Islands and surrounding communities to enhance the lifestyle and living conditions, quality lifestyle and living conditions of those residents. We ask for your consideration and approval of this project. As you know, we currently have affordable housing since 1981 for the residents of Sea Island. So for the last 40 years, we've been providing affordable housing. The 2.8 acres would allow us to construct another residential housing unit to enhance the services that we're currently providing for the residents of Sea Islands. As many of you know, this is really a need not only for the Charleston area, but for the state. And it also is a need for Johns Island. So we are asking for your assistance and support in this effort.
Thank you, Mr. Burton.
I also want to thank those who are supporting us in reference to, especially with the Conservation Authority who supports us in this project. And I also want to just do a shout out for the chief and his partners and workers, because they're very supportive in their efforts of supporting and providing support for Johns Island and Johns Island Rural Housing and the residents. They're very responsive, and I'm talking about the police officers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Repeat customer.
You guys are never going to get rid of me. Katie Zimmerman, Executive Director of Charleston Moves. Several of you know I have a long history with this project, but I just wanted to reinforce, I think this is obviously a great use for this parcel, this part of the parcel, and I'm glad to hear that it was officially included as a condition of the PUD to do pedestrian access along the frontage portion of Maybank, which also fits in with the Maybank overlay process that the county and city are working on together. But I do also want to, and I don't think that it's possible to include it as a condition of the PUD, but however we can get it done, figure out the pedestrian access across Maybank Highway over to the village apartments as well. I know patients live over there. I know a lot of folks are on foot and on wheelchair and on crutches trying to access and get across Maybank. It's a pretty dangerous section, and so whatever we can do to figure that out would be wonderful, and Charleston Moves is here to help, and anybody else who can help would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to be heard on this matter? Seeing none, it comes to council. All right. Councilmember Wagner, did you have a comment?
Yes, sir. Johns Island first on your 900 units of affordable housing is part of it, right here, right now.
Yeehaw.
Yeehaw. 72 units, it almost doubles the capacity of the Sea Island affordable housing right now. It might show up with a little money with it. There's been some discussions with some folks up in Washington already on this, maybe getting a little bit of help. And it went through Planning Commission without anything negative at all. This is a good deal, very small change to a very big PUD. And let's go for it.
Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you. Mayor, I totally support the concept of providing the affordable units that are in a great location, both for stormwater design as well as the connectivity that everyone is hoping will continue to be built along our travel corridors. I would ask that if Ms. Shaw Johnson could come and just sort of speak to the other request of the Conservation League, that we work hard to make it more permanently affordable. The typical tax credit deals are less than that, and I know that she has already worked with the Sea Island to get at least halfway there in terms of a permanent designation for affordability. So.
Good afternoon. So as Leon alluded to earlier, they have been in the affordable housing business for some time. They are pursuing low-income housing tax credits from SC State Housing, South Carolina State Housing. The tax credits themselves, the compliance period is typically 15 years unless you have other affordable housing funds like home funding in there. I know this organization is looking at a 40-year time frame for this particular development, and they want to use this based on our conversation a few weeks ago to transition some of the members, the tenants that are in their current development over to this new development so that they can begin to look at a renovation and a rehab of those 88 units that are literally on the opposite side of Maybank Highway that have been there, I think, since the early 80s. City of Charleston provided funding for that development years ago relative to infrastructure, so we think this is a great opportunity for those residents and for this organization.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members, I know this is a needed project, and so far as the Sea Island, I know it very, very well. I had a lot of family that lived in those particular housing on the Maybank Highway with Sea Island, and I know we ran some problems. They had some problems years and years ago, but as it's here now, we need to help them fix it, because it's very much needed. Like I always mention, you always hear me saying, but my family on Johns Island goes back 350 years, which it does. So with the island, I know it very well, and when it was dirt roads. I mean, they have changed a whole lot. The island have changed, and a lot of traffic is there, but I remember there was no Seabrook and Kiowa Island there. Because I used to live out there. We lived out there for about 2 years, my family. My mother and father lived up there for 2 years, but the whole island out there from Maybank Highway all the way down to Seabrook and Kiowa Island is my family, going down Bohicket Road and River Road. So I know it very well, but that's an added attraction. That's a place that's very much needed in that area. So we need to do as much as we possibly can to keep it going as it is, because it's a needed project to even have the health care there and to have the housing for people to be able to afford. So I'm glad to be assisting and trying to push it forward and move it forward as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilmember Seeky.
Just briefly, Mr. Morgan, that map you put up that showed the walking 5 and 10 minutes, can you just put that up? So how's our sidewalk inventory and bike ped infrastructure inventory in those two circles?
It definitely needs improvement. It is in place around the shopping center. However, Charleston County is going to be making some improvements soon to the main Bohicket-Maybank intersection. So hopefully we will be getting some better sidewalks through that.
If we're going to put density out there, we've got to give people access across and through those areas, right? How long do you think it's going to be before this gets built out?
The housing here?
Yeah.
I mean, I would think you're probably looking at 18 months to 2 years, something like that, before they're built.
So in government time, that's not very long, so we need to get working on the infrastructure.
Yeah. Matching fund.
Thank you.
Councilmember Waring.
I just want to thank my colleagues. They worked so hard with me to bring me around on this issue, to support this issue. So I'm gonna support this issue with the help of my colleagues. Thank you. Well, I would want to say this. At the planning hearing, I think one of the exceptions was an 8-foot bike pedestrian lane, and I think Mr. Fosberg said they would be able to put that, if allowed through the buffer zone. Maybe there may be an opportunity to put up some funds, as Ms. Zimmerman said, to match the county and get it completed for that whole major intersection out there. Thank you.
All right, no further questions. I'll call the question. All in favor? We do have a motion for the ordinance?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes, we have a motion.
Just checking. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Burton, for helping us with your commitment to affordable housing in Charleston. Yes, sir. Okay, number 3, Mr. Morgan. This is 3.
Yes.
It's number 2. It's number 3.
Yes, 2591 Morning Dove Lane in West Ashley. It's about a 1/4 acre. This is a recently annexed property, annexed on September 10th. This would be part of the PUD that's in the surrounding neighborhood of Canterbury Woods. Every time we annex properties in this area, we bring them into that Canterbury Woods PUD, which is designed to accommodate those annexations. And Planning Commission recommended 6-0 to bring this in as part of the Canterbury Woods PUD.
Would anyone like to be heard on this matter?
Move for approval.
We have a motion to approve. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Number 4.
This is a property on Playground Road that relates to drainage projects that we've had in the area that have led the city to acquire these areas, and they've been annexed into the city, and they would be zoned SR2, which matches the surrounding area, and the Planning Commission and staff recommend approval of this request.
All right. Would anybody like to be heard on this matter?
Second.
Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Okay. Then we have a property on Rushland Landing Road. It's 3.76 acres. It was zoned R4 in Charleston County. It would come in the city at a slightly lower density RR1, which is 3.5 units an acre. Both staff and Planning Commission recommend approval.
Would anyone like to be heard on this matter? Seeing none, it comes to council. We have a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion? Councilmember Wagner, we're on number 5 on Johns Island. Did you have any comments or discussion? Councilmember Gregory?
There is a discrepancy. I'm sorry about the titling, but this is the Rushland Landing item before you. Yes, sir.
All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next is approval of our city council minutes from September 24th. I have a motion to approve and a second. Any additions, deletions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next will be our citizens' participation period. We had a sign-in sheet out on the desk, and I think we're going out to retrieve it. We have a 30-minute period, so we kind of divided up evenly. We got 20 folks who signed up, so let's say 90 seconds apiece. And please state your name and address when you come forward. Madam Clerk will call out a few names at a time, and y'all just queue up, and we look forward to hearing your remarks.
Okay, we'll start with Anthony Bryant, Muhammad Idris, I think he left, Franny Henty, and Alyssa Letzo. Pardon? Yes, he said 20.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. The writ of certiorari that was, I worked on this for 2 years, actually. When I found out about a police report that was done many years ago that exposed my social security number, my name, and it wasn't redacted. It exposed my name on the website in a very negative way. I placed that on record at the court on my own because I refuse to allow any government entity to humiliate me in this fashion as I humiliated myself under Rule 73 and Rule 64. Rules, Article 4 says the seizure of a person. In this state, Mustafa Meminger was the first treasurer of the Confederacy. Make sure you correct that statute right there. He was the first treasurer of the secretary. He's a secretary of the Treasury for the Confederacy. This is the premise of this building. And so therefore, I'm not surprised what happened to me and my family. I appreciate what you did. And I'm going to build from it. I'm going to build on it. And you can vote on it. But you can guarantee I will be fighting this fight forever. Thank you for your service and time.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mohammed Idris, then Franny Henty.
Evening. We have a picture here where we have two churches, and we have J.C. Calhoun on Marion Square, and we're working to remove that statue, J.C. Calhoun. We have a picture here also of Simmons, who was the great Iron Man. And we have a picture of him. He looked like he's near a tree. And we have a picture of African American being hung. And when you look at the picture of Simmons, the iron builder, it looked like I say, he's being hung. So we're asking you that we remove that statue from off of Marion Square, and we are naming, that area. Pull up Simmons and Alma Adab Drive, changing Calhoun Street to that name. And concluding.
Time. Okay, Ms. Franny Henty.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for your service. This is a recording. I'm here again about fill and build. Okay. Tonight, as a grandmother concerned about the quality of life we are leaving for our children and our grandchildren by continuing the dangerous practice of fill and build, which is flooding out our neighbors. We are clearly at critical mass in many ways in an engineering crisis. I'm here tonight as a realtor who has been paying my dues into the system since 2003. My main concern is the harm fill and build has done and continues to do to our current inventory, and what continuing this practice will do to our environment, quality of life, and the increase of flood insurance premiums, which will gravely affect housing affordability to current homeowners. Please vote yes to the first reading restricting fill and build tonight. As we know, this ordinance can be tweaked in the second and third readings. Thank you.
Okay, Alyssa, I think she spoke earlier. Okay. So Steve Green, Rich Thomas, Jason Crowley, and Leah Farah. They got to do better. Farrell.
Good evening. Steve Green, 2156 River Road, Johns Island. Johns Island needs representation on the City Planning Commission, and I support the next Planning Commissioner appointee be from Johns Island, not Jimmy Bailey from Kiowa. Kiowa's interests in the city are very different from the citizens of Johns Island, so please appoint a Johns Island resident to the Planning Commission. I also want you to support the fill and build ordinance from Councilman Griffin. I told you 2 weeks ago about my flooding problems caused by the fill and build construction of Stono View subdivision on River Road. which is effectively an earthen dam between my house and the Stono River. I lived on River Road for 36 years and never had a flooding problem until the Stono View subdivision was built. It is the fill and build damming that prevents the natural flow of water to the Stono River. I'm in the Burden Creek floodplain, and the natural ecology of that drainage basin has been irreparably damaged. In the last 4 years, I spent thousands of dollars trucking in topsoil for my yard and crushed concrete and gravel for my driveway to mitigate this new flooding problem caused by the city of Charleston. Please prevent this harm from happening to the rest of Johns and James Island and pass the fill and build ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm Rich Thomas from Johns Island. As Steve said, I also urge you to pass this fill and build ordinance on first reading tonight. It's extremely important to Johns Island. There's a perfect example here of what not to do, and that's a project that'll be coming along soon. It's called Twin Lakes. It's off of Cane/Slash Road. It's actually to be built in an area that was a dirt pit back in the 40s or 50s. It's about 10.5 foot elevation. So it's going to require 5 or 6 feet of fill to bring it up for these 124 homes. The Dutch Dialogues recommended exactly that a development like this not be built in that location. If you look through it, it targets that area and says no. Dr. Phil Dustin and I, who's here, I guess, this evening, we did an experiment during Hurricane Dorian. We put probes out in Burden Creek, in particular in the part of the creek that drains this area and all the developed areas around it. What we found was you get this huge slug of runoff coming off of these developed areas, very much unlike the forested areas that have a very slow release of that 6 inches of rain that we got during Dorian. This water is extremely toxic to the marsh and Stono River. It has no dissolved oxygen in it. It's fresh water. It kills our marshes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Once again, Jason Crowley, Director of Communities and Transportation with the Coastal Conservation League. We'd like to start by commending you all for taking up the consideration of the fill and build ordinance tonight. This was something that was very similarly introduced earlier this year by Councilmember Jackson. It didn't make it through, and we're pleased to see that the momentum of the Dutch Dialogues has brought this back forward again today. We hope that as this continues to move through the process, that there's a little bit more nuance added to it to really reflect the needs of our land use issues in the city of Charleston. There should be a little bit more focus on the different parts of our city. James Island, Johns Island, West Ashley are not the exact same places, neither is Daniel Island or downtown. And as you start to get into the weeds a little bit more with this ordinance, considering things like elevation, special flood hazard areas, and attempts to use fill material to meet freeboard requirements. Those are all some of the details that we'd like to see fleshed out in here with a little more effort. All of this together with some other proactive and progressive ideas, such as working with other municipalities in Charleston County on a transfer of development rights program to avoid developing in low-lying areas and making sure that we're not getting into any legal takings issues with property rights. These are all aspects that we hope that will continue to work together as we roll this proposed ordinance forward, as well as other things like the stormwater manual. But we're very pleased to see the effort taken, and we continue to look forward to working with you on this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Leah Farrell with the Preservation Society of Charleston. We're also a member of the Fix Flooding First Coalition, and I'll keep it short. We're also here to express our support of the proposed ordinance on the fill requirement. Clearly, this is something that's been a topic of conversation within the community for a long time now. There's been a lot of studies done. We're still eagerly awaiting the revised stormwater manual. We know the city is actively working on this. We understand that yesterday at committee there was a spirited conversation, and certainly some things emerged that to strengthen the proposed ordinance, and we do agree that there is room for further study. Certainly, we think this is a sound policy. It's needed citywide, but will it apply citywide in one size fits all? No. So that we do expect that this will be further refined, that each community will be able to shape it and strengthen it to be able to suit its needs. But we do think that as far as policy, this is what the city needs. So we urge you to give it first reading this evening, and I thank you.
Okay. Sylvie Bockel, Suzanne Hardy spoke earlier, Debbie Mims, Professor Phil Dustin, and John Edwards.
Ms. Mims?
Good evening. My name's Sylvie Bale, and I currently live at 1 Lennox, but previously I grew up off of River Road on Burden Creek Road, and watched that area change a lot. I think that the ordinance that was previously mentioned is a great idea, and given the fragile ecology of the marsh in that area and the rising levels of microplastics and tire particles in the harbor and in our waterways, I think it's really important. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Deborah Mims. I live at 2762 Summer Trees Boulevard on Johns Island. I'd like to speak about 3 things. My first is the fill and build ordinance. Please vote yes for that. And I'd also like to add, don't approve any more new development until you flesh out the fill and build ordinance. I'd also like to say that I agree with Steve about having a person who actually lives on Johns Island to represent the needs of the residents of Johns Island on the Planning Commission, not someone from Kiowa or Seabrook. And finally, even though most of these requests have been deferred, under Ways and Means, I'd like to request that you do not annex any more properties, because right now you have 33.83 acres being considered to be annexed into the city. We're tired of you guys just taking us over. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Philip Dustin. I live on Burden Creek Road on Johns Island. I'm here tonight to ask you guys to pass the first reading of this ban fill and build ordinance. I realize it needs to be tweaked a little bit, but I'd like to say that we have 2 main causes of flooding in Charleston right now: climate change and fill and build. And we have 2 things standing between the easiest one of those to fix, and that's the fill and build. And that's Mayor Tecklenburg, and it's the people, the builders, and the developers that are profiteering and supporting your campaign, Mayor Tecklenburg. Now, the simplest thing that could be done is to do no harm, as David Wagner said. And the cheapest thing we can do is stop this destructive practice right now. It's not rocket science. We know what it's doing. You know what it's doing. And yet, the people that are profiteering off this are walking away. And don't smile, please. The people that are profiteering from this are walking away from us with all the money. They are stripping the gold out of Charleston. They are tearing our city apart. So the fill and build ordinance needs to be tweaked a little bit. We have to deal with some of the issues of infiltration and density and things like that. But I think it's very simple to realize that fill and build is not only going to destroy the land, it's going to make your insurance rates go sky high, because FEMA 2.0 is going to be based on elevations and risk. And that's going to make a lot of these houses and a lot of these mortgages and this mortgage crisis that's looming on this is going to be ferocious. It's going to make it's going to make the mortgage crisis of 2008 look like a tinker toy. So please think about the economy of Charleston and vote for this. Thank you.
Okay, so Katie. All right, Suzanne Hardy was here earlier, I don't see her. Eileen Doherty. Mayor, what is this? What is this? It says print.
Matilda, Elroy, L. Starts with that first name with an M and last name with an E.
Me.
Okay. Last one, I promise. Katie Zimmerman, Executive Director of Charleston Moves. And first off, thank you all for sitting, all of you for sitting and listening to all of us as you do every 2 weeks. It's greatly appreciated, and we appreciate, all of us, I think, appreciate your service. I just wanted to express our support of the first reading that's going to come up out of the Committee on Public Safety for the ordinance to amend to require people, if they hit a person or a thing while they're driving, that they have to report it. I think that's fairly standard, and I'm glad y'all are filling that loophole. Thank you, Councilman Shade, for leading on that. I do have one edit for it. Instead of accidents, have it say crash or collision, because it's never an accident. So, thank you.
Okay. Eileen? Okay.
Hi, my name's Eileen Doherty. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I've come before you many times. We have had flooding on our property as a result of what we think is a result of a development adjacent to our property that has raised the water table for our property and surroundings. I want to thank Councilman Griffin. I want to thank Councilwoman Jackson and the mayor for all your efforts to address flooding concerns over the last few years. As you know, we are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and the way we build now affects our economic future. We still have a lot of room for improvement in regard to land use and stormwater rules, and I very much support all efforts that, one, limit the impact of new developments on our community, and two, improve our long-term outlook as we embrace the idea that we are living with water as a way of life in Charleston. So we'll need to work on our land use and our building use practices, and that will account for how successful we are with living with water. So I support moving forward with the proposed fill requirements by Councilman Griffin for the first reading. Thank you.
Okay, Josh Dix. Is there a Josh Dix? Okay, followed by Darren Thomas.
Josh Dix, 640 Rutledge Avenue, also the Government Affairs Director for the Charleston Trident Association of Realtors. I want to comment on the fill and bill ordinance. I think it's misguided at best. I was a part of the Dutch Dialogue team, and a lot of what's being said is inaccurate at best, and I encourage council to listen and actually read the report that was put out. I wanted to make sure that I was not misinformed, so I looked to Dale Morris and talked to him yesterday morning. The word eliminate, that was completely taken out of context to what is going on right now. It has to do with the Johns Island chapter, the zone 0 to 6 foot elevation, not a citywide element. So we really need to look at the context of the report, what went into the report, and the spirit of the report. So I encourage council to shoot down the first reading of this ordinance and actually do what the Dutch Dialogues asked for, which was community buy-in and getting all the people involved at the table to look at how we can move this city forward. This is not what this ordinance does. It is not in the spirit of the Dutch Dialogues, and it's an insult, honestly, to those of us who sacrificed all their time and effort to that process. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Darren.
Good afternoon, Mayor Tecklenburg, Council, Darren Thomas with Lowcountry Black Expo. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you. It was 22 years ago when it was Mayor Riley that first approached our organization about establishing this much-needed event in our community. And after 22 years, We continue to serve the Charleston community. Our event scheduled for next March, which annually is the second weekend in March. One of the things that I really want council to understand is while there is a fiduciary responsibility on our organization in using tax dollars, we continue to invest in this community. With the Taste of Black Charleston, which is traditionally at the aquarium, and of course Black Expo, over the past 12 years, we've raised over $60,000 for Teacher Supply Closet. I think it was several years ago, Councilman Waring sharing with us, we were one of the first, or the first organizations to make a donation to the International African American Museum. This event continues to grow, continues to have a major impact. We hire an outside firm to come in and collect the data from all of those persons that visit this community for that period of time. And I'm simply here to ask council to consider our funding and our request for this year as we continue to move this event into the next stage. Thank you.
So thank you, Darren, and in that same spirit, I put on council members' desk, and I'll invite you and anybody here who would like to come next Friday, a week from Friday, at the Joe in the Riley Park Room from I think 9 until 1. We have a City of Charleston Business Opportunity Expo for women and minority businesses and small businesses, and all of our departments will be represented and will engage with small and minority business owners as to how they can do business with the City of Charleston. We hope you'll be able to come. Yes, sir.
That concludes.
All right. Did we miss anybody? Initials ME? Sorry, we missed. Okay, so next we'll move along to our petitions and communications. First up is a reappointment, I guess, of Paul Moltani to our Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee. Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next is a presentation. Councilmember Shea, do you want to set this up for the proposed master plan for Charleston's 350th commemoration?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Madam Clerk. So we passed a resolution on creating a 350 commission to address the celebration of the first English settlers coming to Charlestown in 1670. So coming in 2020 will be the commemoration of this wonderful event. We have partnered with Trio, who is present. Jessica Monday is here, and Abby behind me, but Trio is here. Also, there are several members of the steering committee, and without me naming everybody, but Matt is on our steering committee. I know Amy and John are on our steering committee.
Jonathan Green.
Well, and on our commission itself is Angela Mack and Jonathan Green. And am I missing somebody else on the, Darren Calhoun was here a minute ago. Where's Darren? Oh, Darren's over here hiding next to Jessica. So we have several members of the community who are here present who have spent countless hours either at a steering committee meeting or a commission meeting who have worked diligently to putting together a plan. Our kickoff event will be in April of 2020 at Charlestown Landing. And I don't want to spoil too much of the presentation by Jessica, but Jessica wants to, I'll let you take over from there to talk about what our plans are.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor and council members. I appreciate the opportunity and am honored that the city trusted Trio Solutions with this important project. I definitely want to thank my colleague, Abby Lenarude. She's been very instrumental in helping with this project, and would also like to thank Councilman Shade and Jonathan Green and Mr. John Mitchell. The three of them, everybody's been very supportive, but the three of them have been extremely supportive of this entire initiative, and we are very excited of the progress that we've made. Hopefully you've had a chance to review the master plan, and like to just talk about some of those highlights today and give you an opportunity to ask any questions if you might have any. So We really just wanted to update you on our progress regarding the Charleston 350th commemoration. Presented to you in the master plan was really a compilation of over a year of meetings, interviews, brainstorming sessions, one-on-one conversations. I see Miss Ruth Rambo up top. Appreciate you being here. She is one of the individuals that we had an opportunity to sit down and speak with. And I hope that you're pleased with the plan that you received. It certainly was a true effort to incorporate a lot of different ideas, and we wanted it to be a true reflection of not only looking at our past and reflecting, but recognizing we've got a lot to celebrate, but we also have a lot of reflection that we have to do. And so we really look at our 350th birthday as an opportunity to set the stage for the future. And as the slide states, this first one, our story is really still unfolding, and we're looking at 2020 as an opportunity to share our story, and we are inviting the community to join in helping us tell our full and accurate story as it relates to our past, our present, and our future. The signature events, or a series of events that we would have in 2020, as Councilman shared, will be kicking off with Founders Day at Charlestown Landing, which really is commemorating the birth of the Carolinas. I see up there etched in the marble, founded in 1670. And as we've gotten involved with this project, it's really fascinating how once you really start diving into history, the reminders just around us everywhere. And we really have an opportunity to take a closer look at that and not only celebrate, but make some changes that need to be made. I know he's not here today, but I definitely want to thank Rob Powell. His team at Charlestown Landing have been phenomenal. They're really bringing the state support to this project and are truly owning the Founders Day initiative. It's really Founders Day times 100. And they are very much open to not having it be your typical Founders Day. They want the experience that day to be a true journey through our 350 years. So if you have any organizations that you would like to see be part of that event, please let me know. We also have, in May 2020, have an opportunity to reflect on our transatlantic connection. Not only do we have the Transact race finale that will be in the City Harbor and Marina, but the College of Charleston has put together the CLAW Conference, which is a phenomenal series of academic and scholarly programs that really are taking a closer look at Charleston's relationship with the port cities and transatlantic slave trade and the transatlantic connection that Charleston has. And so there's not an exact date because that really is going to transpire over probably a 2 to 3 week period in May. Then we have in July, we have a summer music and arts festival that will take place at Joe Riley Park and Brittlebank Park. And this is an opportunity for us to really celebrate our creativity and performing arts and visual arts. We have so much of that here in Charleston, and this is the day that we want to really celebrate that with our community and just highlight our rhythm and creativity as we refer to it. And then the final signature event is November 8th, and we're working toward actually blocking off Broad Street from Old Exchange all the way up to King Street. and having a community unity celebration. And this is where we feel we're really going to leave a mark on our legacy of how we approached our 350th anniversary and pave a path forward for our future, bringing the community together in a transformation table type of an event where neighbors are having breaking bread with complete strangers that they have never met and having an opportunity to have a deeper conversation and dialogue with one another about how we see the next 50 years. And so these are really our signature events, but I would like to share that truly the heart and soul of this commemoration is going to come from our partnering events. And those are events that will be held throughout the year, and they will be sanctioned as official 350 event. Amy is chairing our partnering events committee, and so we have a great group that is working toward an online application. So if you're with a community organization or business and you want to host an event and it falls in line with supporting the overall mission of Charleston 350 commemoration, then you would complete that and the committee would approve whether or not your event would be considered a Charleston 350 event. And so it's through our partnering events that we feel will really have hundreds of opportunities throughout 2020 to really allow the entire community, neighbors, visitors, and anyone that is interested in being part of this story to engage. So I shared this with you because we really feel that there are several key elements that are going to make this successful. Some of these are already in place and we're working toward others. Leadership. You have already demonstrated your leadership to this project through the resolution and the establishment of working toward this master plan, and all of the volunteers and community leaders who are part of the commission and the steering committee. So we really feel good about the leadership that we have in place. Partnering events, as I just mentioned, will allow a year-long opportunity of celebration and reflection and progress. We also want to have community involvement. The signature events are open to the public and give everyone an opportunity to be engaged. The Charleston 350 Fund will help us actually fund this initiative, as well as provide community grant opportunities, supporters in terms of sponsors and volunteers, and then the last is really a commitment to our legacy and making sure that we're sharing our full and accurate story. So I open, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. I'm excited that everybody that is here is going to be part of this story. And again, if you have any ideas or thoughts based on the plan we've put together, we realize this is a work in motion, and we're happy to sit down and have that conversation. So again, thank you all for your support, and I look forward to being involved with this project through 2020.
Thank you, Jessica. I did not recognize Ms. Rhoda Green, who's also on our commission. She's kind of hiding over there next to Jonathan Green. And I'm going to ask if Jonathan, who's a co-chair with me on this, if he has any other comments or input, to give a few brief remarks. And very brief.
Well, I'll make my mark with our conclusion. We hope to energize the city with lots of exciting history information, and the goal really is to have a great time, inclusive of all people in the city of Charleston. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? We thank you for your hard work. It's really going to be an exciting year. Just in case anybody was wondering, the word for a 350th anniversary is a semi-septennial. All right.
Thank you.
God bless you. All right. Jessica. So next we have a brief report from our Director of Planning, Jacob Lindsay, on our hotel task force meeting that occurred recently.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. On October 15th, the hotel task force met to discuss the matter of rooftop bars and restaurants. We had a very comprehensive discussion that related to the proposed locations for future rooftop bars and restaurants, noise and the regulation of noise, as well as discussion of where rooftop bars and restaurants may be in other parts of the city other than downtown. Staff are going to conduct some additional research, do some detailed mapping of specific areas, and bring forward recommendations about how that ordinance would be amended, as well as how we can change our regulatory practices and our enforcement to make sure that rooftop bars and restaurants are handled properly. We're going to reconvene the group. We'll be ready to do that within the next 2 weeks, and we'll survey the members before we reconvene. So an amended ordinance will come after that group endorses it.
So if I may share a little anecdote, a case in point. Last Friday night, city staff, including Mr. Lindsay, Meg Thompson, and we invited President Shue because we wanted him to see some of his students out on the street. We started at 10 o'clock Friday night on the upper end of King Street and made our way down to numerous, we had a night out on town. We were bar hopping, okay? Yeah. Well, I thought folks knew me pretty well, but I tell you, President Shue now, he's a rock star now. Those students were all over him. So we stopped at Uptown Social, which is one of the places we had talked about having a rooftop bar, right? And there was this loud, we were just talking outside because it was too loud inside to even have a conversation. And I guess young people like that, but there was this music out on the street. It was loud as could be, and it wasn't coming from up above. It was coming from the place next door. And when you looked, I went across the street and looked up, and what they had done, their speakers, rather than turned inward to service their customers, the speakers were turned out to King Street, so to blare the music out onto the street and onto the public, I guess to give the impression that this is a place where you ought to come, that it's a wild happening place, you know? And so it was just a perfect case in point about the need for this refinement of our noise ordinance, because in this case, I mean, they really ought to turn their speakers around.
Mr. Mayor, we don't speak with our mouths, we speak with our dance moves.
I see. Gotcha. I gotcha. So we'll continue to work on that and get something back to council in the relative near future. So without a, yes, sir.
Yes, I had sent an email out to council and you about putting Keith Benjamin from Uptown Social on the committee. Did y'all do that?
We did.
Thank you.
He attended, and the young lady that's his partner attended, and there was one other volunteer from the beach company. I can't remember his name right now, but he attended as well. So it's a very wide open process by consensus. Yeah.
If we shut it down, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I made the personal request that they turn the speaker around inwards. Yeah.
They probably turn the speakers out so they can talk with each other outside.
Well, per Councilmember Griffin, that doesn't really convey. Their dance moves are more important. All right, without objection, Councilmember Waring has indicated he has another commitment tonight, so Councilmember Shade, if you don't mind, we'd like to go ahead and take Committee on Public Works next.
Mr. Mayor, we have another item under petitions and communications.
Oh, did I miss something? Okay, we have one more item. Is Tracy McKee here? Okay, she was going to make a very brief presentation about our performance review projects. Tracy, you want to come forward? Yeah. And then we'll start our committee reports. Susan Petit is with us. She can chime in from the balcony if need be. I am.
Okay. Mayor and members of council,
Julia Novak is not with us tonight, but as a supplement to the report that was in your packets, Susan Petit, who is up there, Amy Wharton and I wanted to provide a brief update on our progress towards implementing the recommendations made by Julia and her team. So Novak provided the city with 9 reports that are all listed here. We still have a lot of work to do, but we hope that this brief summary will bring some sunshine to some of the great work that's actually going on in the city. So for most of these reports, Susan and I have met with the departments involved. We've gone through the recommendations, reprioritized them as needed, and collaboratively worked with departments to develop work plans to complete the work. And for the projects that are well underway, we have website links that you can actually track our progress, and those get updated quarterly. So check out the website. So TRC, this was the first report that was submitted. Our path forward has not necessarily been a straight line, but we've actually made some really good progress. Some of the highlights of the accomplishments, we hired a TRC administrator, a TRC coordinator. All the reviewers now attend all of the relevant TRC meetings, so if they reviewed a project, they actually attend the meeting. We have launched TRC University, which is an outreach to all the developers. So we've been doing those once a quarter. Eric Schultz, our TRC administrator, has been putting those together, and so that's been really successful. We've eliminated these unofficial PDF reviews, which were just causing frustration and confusion. And probably the biggest thing is the e-reviews. So we are on the cusp of going all digital with TRC reviews. So we hope that that's going to be fully implemented come January 2020. So I think everyone knows that TRC has been a little bit behind. So as we've started to try to understand why, we've started to look at some data to try to really understand what's going on and kind of how we got there. So I found this really interesting. Just looking at city growth, since 2000 to 2018, we've seen an increase in population of 59%, but our city workforce has grown by 20%. That's a significant difference. So just looking at TRC submittals, from 2010 to 2018, we've gone from 179 in that year up to 459 submitted last year. So again, pretty big increase. So this actually shows the blue line are submittals made in 2019. The light gray line are submittals that were made in 2018. So we can see just in these last 2 years, consistently every month, the number of submittals that come into TRC is higher. So there's a lot going on. So another element to understand how we got into the situation of being behind with TRC was to actually track the number of hours it takes to review a TRC submittal. So since March, all the plan reviewers have been logging their review time. So you can see this is just an example of site plans. So we've got all the different departments that are involved, and you can see most of them take about approximately an hour to review one submittal. However, you'll notice there's some big spikes in engineering and stormwater, right? So we're seeing engineering takes 5 to 10 hours to review one submittal, where stormwater can take 10 to 15 hours to review one submittal. So I just kind of want to walk you guys through just a short exercise here, a little math, if you will. But if we look at how many hours we have to work in a month. So we've got 4 weeks in a month, right? 40-hour work week. We've got 160 hours to work with in a month, right? So if we take TRC reviews that were the lightest month, like in February, we had 39 TRC submittals in the month of February. On average, 70% of those are site plans. So that would be 27 submittals are site plans. So even if we take the most conservative number of hours for stormwater, that would be 270 hours required for the month of February to do those reviews out of 160 hours a month of work hours. Quite impossible to meet that number, right? So, so that gives us some context for how we kind of got into this situation that we're in. I just kind of want to take it another step further too. So if we, some of these are actually third-party reviews, as we know, and if those third-party reviews are taking 10 hours, and we pay on average $150 an hour, we're spending $1,500 per submittal. So, and then the fee for a TRC review is $600. So we are subsidizing $900 just in stormwater review. So a lot of assumptions made there, but it starts to paint the picture of the situation. Yeah. So, so then we have, this is just an example of subdivision reviews. So just a quick view of 2019 by the numbers. 67% have been completed on time this year. Now that doesn't sound awesome, but when you compare it to 2018, which was at 41%, that's a significant improvement. And 33 days to review submittal compared to 75 in 2018. So we're making good progress. So the second report submitted by Novak was a workforce profile and employee survey. As you all know, compensation was a primary concern of, oh, okay, sure. This one?
Isn't one of the issues the screening process for completeness? We had a process in place saying X application is not complete, so it goes back to then we would cut down substantially.
Sure. So I don't have good numbers on that. That is something that we've talked about a lot with the TRC group. Since the increase in fees last year, what they are telling me is that they've seen a significant increase in the quality of submittals. So that has helped tremendously on those poor quality submittals that were taking staff time needlessly. So, but that's something that we're still consciously aware of and monitoring. Thank you. Good question. Great question.
Tracy,
I'm so glad to hear someone read it.
Well, Tracy, part of it is, my understanding from some of the engineering groups is that they have to come to the TRC meeting to find out staff objections to the submittal. It would make a lot of sense if they submitted something, staff has objections, to let those objections be known, corrected before you meet. But anyway, that's part of it.
No, absolutely, and that's another great point, and that was something that we are working. So with the review, with the impossibility of meeting review times, the idea is that we give those comments back in advance of the meeting so that the applicants can come prepared. But the workload is so much that they can't keep up. So they're kind of just doing everything that they can to respond as quickly as they can. Mm-hmm. But certainly those reviews that are completed before the meeting, those are getting sent out 2 days or 48 hours ahead of the meeting.
Are you familiar with the comparative study that the Charleston Metro Chamber of Commerce did, comparing our approval process with that of Mount Pleasant and again with that of North Charleston?
I am not.
Yeah, well, we're going to make sure you get a copy.
Okay. Excellent.
One other thing that before as we move forward on TRC, again, we need to report fairly quickly. There was another element that I could see that a lot of neighborhoods complain about. address anywhere.
So if Chip would like to maybe respond to that, because that's kind of a process, a TRC process question. You might want to restate your concern, Councilmember Gregory.
One of the issues that we get from our community is that it's great for them to go and sit and listen, but they have absolutely no input. And I did not see anywhere in the report where that was discussed.
Right, and what I've kind of told people, or at least internally, is we have the ability to do that if we would like to. TRC, I don't like that we call it a technical review committee because it makes it sound like it's a committee. People don't vote up, if you don't get stormwater approval, the fact that zoning and, the fire marshal and all that vote in favor of stormwater approval doesn't matter. The idea is to get everybody in the room that issues permits for the development, individual permits really, together to comment on the project. So it's really more of a technical review staff as I look at it. And so, I also hear concerns about like FOIA requirements, and that would not, in my opinion, that wouldn't apply outside of a committee, an advisory committee context. That's not to say you can't allow it to happen, and I know there's been some internal discussions about doing that.
I'd like to live here.
Absolutely. Understood. I'm not advocating for or against, I'm just letting you know the options.
We hear you, so we'll definitely, and that's something that has come up, so thank you for that as well. So, okay, I'll speed through the rest of them because I know that we have a chance of actually getting out in a reasonable time tonight.
Yeah.
Hopefully I didn't.
So what I was going to suggest, maybe you take just one or two more and then we schedule you to come back.
Sure, that's fine. So, in this one, I think you all know that, the employee survey was really important and compensation was a big factor. With the 69% of employees believing that their salaries did not reflect their work contributions, and in 2019, you all approved that increase, which actually helped kind of stabilize our attrition rate. So thank you for that. So I'll just jump to, I had a lot of good stuff in here to highlight, but I will jump right to the last one and I'll come back with some additional input for you all. But I just want to, this was not a one-person effort. Susan Poteet was very involved too, but it was not a two-person effort either. So this was a very thoughtful, supportive, and collaborative effort between a lot of members of staff to accomplish all these things.
And I thought so too, Mr. Mayor, just because I did go through the report, okay? And there was another issue with regard to diversity. There was a lot of discussion with regard to diversity. But what I thought that was missing is there was no analysis of where people fall by race and ethnicity with regard to salary, positions, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that it was kind of lacking in that area, and I think that there needs to be a little more spent on that area.
Well, we are getting ready to do a follow-up survey. So this was actually done 2 years ago, the employee survey. So we're actually planning to do another one this December. Is that right? Yes. So that's in December. So we can actually talk about how we can collect the information to let Novak do that. Obviously, we want them to hold the data because we want employees to respond so that and feel that their information is safe, right? So. Yes.
Could you also consult with the chairman of the Women's Commission too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Great. Yes, those are great comments. Thank you. Sure.
Tracy.
Yes, sir.
The report has a lot of data, a lot of recommendations. Of all those recommendations, what's been initiated today on all these recommendations? Where are we on any kind of change in the implementation of this study?
Yeah, so, that was kind of really the purpose of this, was to kind of walk you through some of those highlights of the things that have been done. We kind of just touched on some of the things with TRC, but we are putting all those on the website as well. So we've listed all the recommendations, the priority of those, and then where we are in getting those things implemented. Absolutely, yes.
results? Do we have any results on the implementation?
So for example, I mean, most of her presentation was about TRC, and she started out with
Yes,
these accomplishments that, have been.
and this
have been
isn't
accomplished.
comprehensive. I was trying to hit kind of the high points of the things that I thought have been most impactful.
And maybe it's too soon to tell, but I mean, I looked at all that stuff. So, okay, we got an administrator, coordinator, everything. What I'm hearing is the TRC committee is, the process is still too long. And
Yes.
so have we?
Yes.
Have we moved it back a day? Have we moved it back a week? Have we moved it back a month?
We actually just implemented some kind of emergency review times based on the data that we've collected to try to mitigate the kind of backlog of TRC submittals to help us get caught up. Because we know that if we can't be reliable in our review times, it really just holds up everybody else. And we know that, and we certainly don't want to do that. So we've actually implemented some emergency review times to help dig us out of that hole, if you will.
Thank you. So we'll come back next meeting with some more reports on the other tasks that the group has undertaken. It's really been a remarkable effort, a collaborative effort.
Yep.
And thank you again to Susan Petit, who really on the ground leads a lot of this, but Amy Wharton and Tracy, they involve all the departments that are interrelated on any different topic, and it's really resulted in a remarkable collaboration of our departments and department leaders that, I'll be honest with you, didn't exist when I was around as a department head 20 years ago. It really is a game changer. So thank you. All right, so next is our council committee reports, and again, with y'all's patience and acceptance, we'll move first to our Committee on Public Works and Utilities. Councilmember Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank my colleague, Councilman Shahid, for allowing me to go in front. Thank you very much. First up is acceptance and dedications on AI and AI2 passed unanimously, and I so move approval.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it.
And if you will allow, I will skip down and come back to item B and go to miscellaneous I2, which is the ordinance to amend stormwater.
Okay, we have a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion?
But we have some discussion. That's why I want to move it up.
Well, I would like to add a little discussion, if I may. So this is on the fill requirements for new construction, correct?
Correct, yes, sir.
Yeah. So yesterday at our committee meeting, we had some robust discussion about this and about what the intent of the proposed ordinance was. And Mr. Griffin replied to me that his intent was to prevent the filling of wetlands, which is a great goal. I did want to share with council in terms of achieving that goal that it's a little more complicated than passing this ordinance, that the jurisdictional wetlands are under the authority of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And so we do impact their decision with comments. For example, the city provided comments to the Corps when there was a wetland application for the Harmony project. And I don't know if we turned their opinion much on it, but we certainly stated our objections at that time. And I think they will take into account policies of the city, such as our stormwater manual. But I did want to let y'all know that we really need to establish those stormwater manual policies in order to further impact the Corps of Engineers' decision-making when it comes to filling wetlands. So the other goal that I tried to elaborate or describe of when I think of fill and build is that, for example, you have a neighborhood that's about to be developed, and as has been described to us mostly out on Johns Island, how a developer would come along and literally scrape off the top foot or two of the more natural, earth and covering of the property, and then bring in a different kind of fill and add more fill to it. So with all due respect, this particular ordinance doesn't really prevent that from happening. It just says that if you bring a yard in, you got to take a yard out. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that a guy couldn't scrape and take away and then bring in the same amount of fill. Now, we do have a requirement in the ordinance about the permeability, the absorption factors of the soil that they bring in, admittedly, but it still wouldn't allow, as long as somebody removed as much as they brought in, it would still allow someone to build up the land, particularly for the footprint of a building. So I just want to make everybody aware of that if we're trying to accomplish, not allowing what I think of as fill and build to occur, we're going to have to dig a little deeper in order to accomplish that. Now, there's been a few comments made here tonight about, what's in the Dutch dialogues and what's not. I would share with you that I don't believe the Dutch dialogues process intended for this to be a blanket requirement across all of the city, and I'll give you an example in just a moment. And that's why we chose 4 different areas for them to focus on, one being the east side of Charleston, one being the medical district, one being Church Basin, and one being Johns Island, because they all have their own characteristics, and one size doesn't fit all. Each drainage basin has its own properties and its own characteristics, and that's why in our proposed stormwater manual that we got an update also on yesterday at your committee meeting, we come forward with the concept to designate special protection areas within our city. And in fact, Johns Island is one of them. The Church Creek Drainage Basin is one of them. So we know there are known areas that have flooded, and these areas should be treated with special requirements and special care. And that's why, outside of this, a year ago, after some study of the Church Creek Drainage Basin, that we put in a fill requirement that if you were to bring in a yard of fill, that you had to take not just 1, but 1.25 yards out, so that you not only compensate for what's coming in, but you provide more storage than what you had to begin with. And so in special areas, these kinds of requirements are absolutely needed, and that's why we put that requirement in place for the Church Creek, and that's why we want to do it in other areas as coming forward with stormwater manual. But there's some areas of the city where it's not appropriate. And I'll just give you an example. We're now renovating Stony Field. Well, that property had sunk, and we needed to compact it on down. So if you go over there right now, there's a whole bunch of fill on Stony Field, right? Y'all have seen it. So when they remove the fill, they're not going to remove it all because the land has been compressed. Honestly, if this ordinance were to pass, 3rd reading as is, we would not be able to do what we're now doing at Stony Field to correct that problem and compensate for it. So what I would respectfully submit for first reading of this ordinance is to amend it to make it as strict as we did for Church Creek, and say that if you bring in 1 cubic yard, that you got to take out 1.25 cubic yards. It's worked over there already, and it can work in other places. So the second amendment, though, that I would respectfully offer is that we make this applicable to known flooding areas as will be designated in our stormwater manual. We're calling them special protection areas. And yes, Johns Island would be one of those special protection areas. But one size doesn't fit all. We need to be thoughtful about this so that we don't have unintended consequences when in fact some areas compaction is needed, or you're building a road and you need some fill to make that happen. We don't want to disallow development in places that we want it to occur, which may require a little bit of fill, as long as their other drainage requirements are met. So again, I would respectfully entertain an amendment to increase the removal to 1.25 as we've done in Church Creek, and also to designate this ordinance 2 areas that we're calling special protection areas. Councilmember Gregory.
You can't stop finding him.
You'll make a lot of money. I mean, as I read the draft, Mayor, a lot of what you have said is already there, especially in B and C in particular, that you have to equal to or offset. Some of the same language that you're speaking appears in the ordinance already to me. Now, it doesn't get into specific areas, but the kind of exemptions I think you're kind of talking about, I think this captures it. At least my reading, okay? C and B on fill requirements, and I can read it if necessary. To the extent, no, that's the one that puts the storm design standards above this if necessary. Okay, in B, it says the volume difference of the ground surface showing no increases calculated by, no, that's not it. I think it is. Equal to, I read it somewhere, Mary.
It's an A.
I read it wrong?
While he deciphers.
While you're looking at that, Councilmember Waring.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the reason, as we did have a good bit of discussion on this at Stormwater, and the committee was actually divided 2-2 to move it and bring it forward to council, and I broke the tie because I thought we should have that discussion. And I said in that meeting, Mr. Mayor, that I am not for across the board either. But I think one thing this does is it accelerates the conversation to identify those areas quicker. And I think between a first and a second reading, this isn't anything I think we need to stretch out with a task force for 6 months or 9 months or anything like that. Because of the Dutch dialogues, because our drainage manual is rounding the curve finally towards completion, certainly by year's end. Mr. Fountain, he's not paying attention, but I think our drainage manual would be updated within 60 days. I think this is something, those nuances that you're talking about, I think it's imperative that we identify those special areas and not let them continue to be open for potential development and slide through, because our process is a slow process, quite frankly. I think Councilman Griffith has accelerated the process by bringing this forward for a full discussion on council. That's why I asked to move it forward.
And I concur with that. Councilmember Jackson, then Moody, then Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do appreciate, I sat in on the Public Works Committee yesterday just to hear how you all were going to discuss this, and I agree that it's appropriate to have it here at the full council. Just listening between your question, Mr. Mayor, to Councilmember Griffin about what was his intent in doing this in this ordinance, and he said to protect wetlands. And I think that your knowledge of wetlands is the correct term in terms of the actual use of the word wetlands when they're part of the public conveyance that is then controlled by the Army Corps of Engineers for evaluation. I honestly don't think that Councilmember Griffin meant that kind of detailed definition of wetlands. No, he was not. I think you were, I think you were meaning by everything that I've heard you say about this opportunity, Councilmember Griffin, to follow the recommendations of the Dutch dialogues is essentially describing in one word what we're trying to talk about now as special protection areas. So I think we really just all need to get on the same, level playing field. We are now elected officials in this season of the city's existence, knowing what we know about water, knowing that we have to start to begin to live with water in that way of talking about it, and knowing that we have the expertise available to us, and we've made ourselves available to that expertise over the last year. And we're talking about protecting the areas that are the most vulnerable and at risk of overdevelopment that uses the kind of construction technology we call fill and build. So I really think that we just need to do our citizens a great favor and agree that we're all on this page together and we all want the same thing, to protect our city. I have no problem voting to pass this ordinance tonight. I do think it needs a lot of detailed evaluation and revision and making it more appropriate for the places that we know we really have to protect. So however that happens, I think we should do that. I could also vote yes for your amended ordinance, Mr. Mayor, because I think that also needs to have the tweaking and the drilling down and the expertise that we know we have available to us. So I think we should just do something. I think that bringing this forward tonight is a grand and noble gesture, Councilmember Griffin, in terms of why we know we need to take the next action steps. After the Dutch dialogues, we use that Dutch dialogues as a way to sort of, take our own decision-making time out. And the time has come. We have responsibilities that now we cannot say we don't know anything about. So however we vote tonight, I think we should all vote yes to keep moving this ball down the field and make our citizens at least glad that they have people who are responsive to our ability to learn by what is in front of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Moody and Wagner.
I did yield.
Then Griffin.
I did yield, okay.
Oh, you did yield?
Yes.
You did read it. We'll go back to Councilmember Gregory with everybody's indulgence.
I think, and maybe I'm wrong, I think 27-150A addresses your issue.
No, sir, because
Put a greater amount of existing soil exported from the site?
volume of fill material imported onto a site shall be offset with an equal or greater, but it doesn't require a greater amount, it just requires an equal amount.
Or
greater.
Okay. I'm just saying that's an easy
That's
fix.
right. I would like for it to be greater. I would like for it to be the same as what we did in Church Creek Basin.
I think that we,
Yes, sir.
within what we have here, you can tweak this real quick.
That's right.
And address your issue.
Absolutely. It'd be very easy to change.
Okay.
Councilmember Moody?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This whole issue, to me, is really too broad, too much involved, too complex to be settled tonight. And what I want to do is, whatever we do, is that we don't do some kind of damage, or we don't do something that causes damage. And I wanted our attorney, because I want to understand exactly what this first reading will do, because those of you that have been around know that I'm not a big moratorium person. And it feels to me like this is some kind of a moratorium, just kind of shutting down everything. So I want to know kind of what this pending doctrine, what impact that would have on a first reading, or just exactly what this first reading would do.
Pending doctrine ordinance would not apply to this ordinance because it's not a zoning ordinance, and the pending doctrine ordinance only applies to zoning ordinance. So if you give first reading to this ordinance, it is not going to go into effect. It doesn't impact any ongoing developments at this point in time.
So would it impact anything that's coming up that hadn't started?
The ordinance does not go into effect until it's ratified.
So it really has no effect on anything other than we've passed first reading. That was what I wanted to make sure that was my understanding.
That's correct.
We are very close to getting our stormwater manual done. Is that not correct? I mean, probably middle of middle of December.
You're probably right.
No, I was going before the TRC.
December.
No, how close are we to having the stormwater manual done?
So we've received the majority of the comments. We have one firm left that's finalizing their comments. We should have those responded to, I would hope, within the next month or so. And then, yes, we'd be looking for having a final presentation for council in November to December timeframe.
So when we do the stormwater manual, this would probably go out the window anyway. Is that correct?
No.
So they're two different situations. I mean, you could conceivably
These
pass.
items wouldn't be incorporated into the stormwater manual?
So the manual attempt. So the manual has an attempt to deal with the negative impacts of fill. This is a different methodology for dealing with fill. So you could conceivably pass both things and have them both apply at the same time. The engineer would have to figure out a way to address both requirements. The intent on the manual had been to, again, account for the negative impacts of fill, the negative ecological impacts of fill with special protection areas, with a volume-based requirement. There are a series of requirements for fill based on offsets and maximum slopes within the manual. So from a staff position, we feel the manual accomplishes much of the intent behind protecting the city from flood impacts from development. It is not, I don't want to say that it is identical to what is proposed here. They are different things and they do accomplish different things. But we feel comfortable from a staff level on where we are with the manual, and that's the comments and the interaction we've had with that stakeholder task force is to try to figure out what methodology works for everyone.
But we shouldn't be, I mean, these two things ought to be compatible, the stormwater manual and the whatever this ordinance says.
So again, with the manual, we had attempted to address it, all of this comprehensively through the manual. I just don't want to say that we addressed it the same way that the ordinance does.
Well, I guess my question originates with the Dutch dialogue. And my reading of that, it calls for certain areas to, like I said, from 0 to 6, you shouldn't be doing anything in that. I mean, you shouldn't be filling it. Maybe you build something, but you got to build it up or whatever. But you probably shouldn't even be building in a 0 to 6. From 6 to 10, maybe you can do something. Whether you fill or not, I guess that's where this comes in. If you're going to fill something, you got to take 1 1/4 out or something, I guess. But we've got these different areas. This seems like something affixed for everything, and I just don't see that that's available, or it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
So the manual is not intended to be a land use planning document. The manual says, theoretically you could develop anywhere. What it does is set expectations and requirements that are very aggressive for development in areas that have flooding issues, where it makes it either very expensive to try to develop that way, or it makes it where your density and things would be greatly reduced. There's methodologies you could do to develop there, but it's a very different looking development because we're trying to, in the manual, again, address what are the negative impacts of the fill rather than the fill itself. The fill causes displacement of water storage. It causes, if you add impervious area, it causes additional runoff. If you block up drainage flow paths, that's a big concern for ecology and for surrounding property owners. And then obviously there's the runoff from the fill itself onto the adjacent property owners, and then the impacts of how the fill kind of, it's not the look, but it's the impact to the kind of the general stormwater for the region. Those things are all addressed in the manual. by requirements of what you would have to do, and those requirements are much stricter in areas of known flooding than they are in areas where we know we have capacity. But there is a capacity, or there is the capability in the manual to do fill. For instance, we've talked about it briefly in Public Works Utilities, and I'm going to give an example, but if you have a master planned community where the entire community is sort of the entire watershed area, and you're putting in fill in that community, in that watershed, but it's all been designed to all drain out successfully, you're not going to worsen flooding. There may be a different aspect from a land use planning on whether that's something you want to do. That's a different question that the manual doesn't address. But from a stormwater perspective, like that fill wouldn't have a negative impact, so it would be allowed within the manual. However, if you're in a low-lying area and you're going to displace water into your neighbors, or you're going to cause new water to enter the system that doesn't have capacity, or you're going to block up the ability for water to flow through your site, all those things, again, are addressed in the manual. So we try to, again, address the impacts of that fill rather than a direct addressing of the fill, other than a few areas where we have maximum fill slopes and some offset buffers.
All right. Councilmember Wagner.
Thank you. We've been all around everything but this daggum ordinance for about 10, 15 minutes now. I don't know where we're going or how we got to all where we're at. Let me read you A, because there's a whole bunch of folks out there wondering what in the name of God are they talking about, because I'm about to worry about what we're talking about. This A says on zero net fill. I don't mind 0 plus 25%, you know, as you'd mentioned. On all new construction developments or redevelopments required by the standard building code to conform to requirements for new buildings, the volume of fill material imported onto a site shall be offset with an equal or greater amount of existing soils exported from the site in accordance with applicable local, state, federal regulations, such that there is no net fill. That's what we're talking about. The oil characteristics, the soil characteristics of any fill material imported onto the site shall be composed of granular soils which promote infiltration and reduce runoff with an infiltration rate of 0.3 inch per hour or greater is verified by infiltration testing results. Okay? It has to perk just a little bit. That's what that says. Nothing greater than that. If you take it out, you replace it with something that will perk. Sand. People have been doing that for years to get their septic tanks approved. Digging holes and putting a whole bunch of sand and stuff in it. And then re-perk it. So, there's only, the only real thing that I saw, and I brought this out, is, like you said, one size doesn't fit all. But one size starts the process. Because C says, if there's any inconsistency between the requirements of this section's Stormwater Design Standards Manual, as amended from time to time, or any other law, regulation, article, ordinance, the more restrictive provisions shall prevail. Well, Matt just told us there's not going to be any really restrictive stuff in there. So this is the beginning of anything that we are going to do in the future based on the stormwater management or the Dutch dialogue. It's not one size fits all. It's a start. And as I read this, and we have at a minimum, I would use the word somewhat contentious discussions on John's Island. I would worry, and I would make an amendment to it too. And let me tell you why. When you're talking fill, when you're building, say, a subdivision, the number one item that is filled are the road beds. Now, why would your road bed have to perk? It's covered. So that would have to be the primary exception to this. If I dig it out of my front yard and I'm building the road in my backyard, I don't know why I would have to take it off-site and then turn around and bring it back. That's kind of that makes no sense. So we'd have to put that one little caveat in there. And so, I mean, I think we ought to just vote first reading and go for, do like we've done in the past, make our adjustments and bring them back at second reading. We've done it time and again in this chamber. And, I mean, I don't see where it's going to hurt anything. If we're not going to take but half the dirt out and put the rest on the road, or 2/3 of it on the road, it should not affect anything except the cost of doing business when the development is built. And possibly we could tweak possibly the perk rate, how we verify that, because it is such a nominal amount. So that is my thought. I'm ready to vote it. I mean, I'd like to do that, but let's.
All right, Councilmember Griffin.
I want to apologize because sometimes I get a little bit frustrated and I show a little too much emotion, but honestly, it's just because I care so deeply about this. And, you know, this is a situation, I think, where we're making a decision that's going to impact our city for generations tonight. Just by having this discussion. We can go all the way back from years and years past. I was looking at the 1984 master drainage study last weekend. All the projects that we're just now starting now were on the books then. And it's taken us 35, 40 years to get the ball rolling. Here we have an opportunity tonight to have a document that was put in front of us a couple weeks ago, and we're already discussing it. That's just something that our city has never done. We've always been reactive. We've never been proactive. And so this is a great opportunity. But I was a little bit alarmed and startled last night when we basically had to have the chairman break a tie, or else we probably wouldn't have this discussion tonight either. Or maybe we might not have even had a vote. So for the person who voted against it last night, didn't want to have the public comment period today, didn't want to have this discussion today, to start trying to make amendments and say he supports it, it's a little bit two-faced for me. And I think that we should all take a step back. We've all looked at this now. We're going to have a good discussion and really think about it for the next week and come back here next time with some revisions. I think all of us have something we want to bring up. And anybody around this table that knows me and talks with me, they know that all I was trying to do was get something on the book so that we could have this discussion. I didn't expect this to be the end-all, be-all, because Charleston is a pocket of communities, and there's a reason why the Dutch came and studied 4 different areas. I agree with all of that. I think our stormwater manual is going to accomplish a lot. But I do think that we should have a specific section of our code that touches on fill. Because fill development has killed this city for years. It really has. I can name a few examples, but the one that sticks out to me the most is the last phase of Carolina Bay on Henry Tecklenburg. Watching truck after truck after truck come in, bring in fill dirt. And now if you drive down Henry Tecklenburg Drive and near the hospital, you look up, this development over here is way up higher than the road. And that road is an access point to a hospital. That's a problem. We have problems on Johns Island and Church Creek specifically that are both mentioned in this report. I'm going to read just a couple of very short sections, if y'all don't mind. Just because we heard tonight that, hey, maybe I didn't get it right, or maybe I misread this or misread. I want everybody in the audience to be the judge. So I'm going to read one passage, one little short paragraph from the overall recommendations, and then I'm going to read one small passage from Church Creek and from Johns Island. Because at the end of the day, those are the last undeveloped acres of Charleston. We have a few. I think Laurel Island, they're having to put a lot of fill dirt on there to make that work. Pretty much any undeveloped section of Charleston, you could say the majority is probably has some sort of wet characteristic to it. Out in my district specifically, Shadow Moss, the neighborhood that I live in currently, they actually advertised for a marina when it was built in the 70s. So we've got some issues long ago that we're just now facing. Just like how we had several drainage projects back in the early 80s that we should have been addressing then that we're just now addressing. We're in a tough spot. Anybody could admit that. Us around this table, we've got a tough job because for years, it almost seemed like we just sort of rested on our laurels and everything was good. You know, Hugo hit, we rebounded. It probably could have been a good time then to work on some of those projects, but we didn't. So here we are today. But just one of the overall recommendations, and even if you want to not take the word eliminate into consideration what I read, please just listen to these page 43, overall recommendations. In areas of new development occurring in flood zones, marshy, intertidal, or otherwise low-lying areas, eliminate or substantially reduce the placement of fill or other structures that decrease the infiltration and absorption performances of these areas. Now, that is going to be brought up again here in a minute on Johns Island, but it's also going to be mentioned in Church Creek. So here we are with an idea that is mentioned in 2 of the 4 categories and could be mentioned on the peninsula as well. Here's Johns Island. This is very important. Elevation zones. The team identified 4 planning or safety zones: wet, ecological, transition, or community. Here's the wet zone. We recommend prohibiting future development in the wet zone. The ecological zone exists from 6 to 10 feet above MSL. Then if you turn to the next page, page 80, the transition zone is between elevation 10 to 15 feet. Now here's some of the bold print on page 80. The ecological zone carries substantial flood risk and can expect to get wet in a 100-year storm. In the transition zone, now this is 10 to 15 feet. Development is possible, including clustered elevated homes. Development here must respect the dynamic nature of the landscape with fluctuating water levels and sufficient maintained overledge drainage channels and the need for tailored flood risk reduction strategies. Fill should be used sparingly, primarily for road construction or to elevate only certain homes. So even there, we're saying one size doesn't fit all, but there's a large area of Johns Island that fill should not be allowed. We're talking there, that's the transition zone. That's the 3rd of the 4 zones. It even says in the ecological zone that, let's see here, only limited and adaptive development should occur, such as low-density, pile-elevated, single-family homes. So that's Johns Island. But then if we flip over to Church Creek at page 116, one of the first 3 recommendations: protect and sustain intertidal zones. Eliminate. Now here we are using the word eliminate in Church Creek. We just heard upstairs from the realtor that it's not used in any section other than Johns Island. But here it is again in Church Creek. Eliminate or substantially reduce the placement of fill or other structures that impair the performance of the intertidal marsh and upland creek system. Do not further reduce their ability to shrink and enlarge with varying water levels. These systems, if unimpeded, naturally accrete and deposit organic material sediments which yield storm surge mitigation and adaptation to sea level rise. I'm no engineer, but I can read, and to me, that says reduce fill. And it says it in 2 of the most devastated areas of Charleston. Johns Island and Church Creek have been hit hard 3 out of the last 5 years, and it could have easily been 5 out of 5 if the storm would have turned. Peninsula would have been devastated too. We're working on things on the peninsula. We just approved over $10 million for the low battery wall. We're working, there's great recommendations in here for the peninsula as well. But I had to find something that I could bring to this council and say, guys, we got to talk about this because it is not right. You know, I think back to those first few homes that I knocked on when I ran for office for the first time. I was nervous. I was afraid that somebody was going to come shut the door on my face and say, get off my porch. What do you know, you little young kid? But But when they opened their door and they gave me 5 minutes, I told them I'd protect them. I told them I'd protect them, their kids, their neighbors. And in the grand scheme of things, I've got to think about the future generations of the city. And these neighborhoods are going to go away. These people are going to pack up and leave. We don't need to be worried about whether or not we can fit 10 million people into this city. We don't need to be focused on increasing the tax base right now. We've got 140,000 people that, oh, by the way, are footing the bill on all these drainage projects, and they need to be supported and protected right now. So I would ask that you give first reading to this, and let's all get together and figure out how we can make this the best document that the city's ever seen. Thank you.
Councilmember Jackson, then Shade.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Griffin. As I thanked you 2 weeks ago, I do appreciate that you have put a sense of timeliness and action-packed decision-making to a cause that, like you, when I was elected 2 years ago, I didn't really appreciate the depth and the breadth of how this challenge was going to define our time in office. So I have poured myself out and tried to learn as much as I possibly can from every avenue of expertise that thankfully exists very noticeably in our city. We have amazing resources with the Sea Grant, NOAA, with the Charleston Resilience Network, with all of the civil engineering firms that are sending their employees to learn the state-of-the-art way of calculating all of these complicated things that Matt does so well to put into actually friendly English language. I think that one of the things that this momentum is going to bring to us, and I will happily vote for whatever first reading document we end up putting on our agenda right this minute, but what Matt said the phrase, and I think what your question was getting at, Councilmember Moody, was the fact that even this ordinance, if we left it as sort of the one-size-fits-all citywide document that now we're saying to ourselves probably needs to be adjusted to be more protective of the special protection areas and all of that. But regardless, this would be part of our building code, essentially, our site permitting code, not a zoning ordinance. And what we're really talking about here ultimately, to protect your future generations, Councilmember Griffin and my grandson, are land use changes that we know we have to be looking at. So I think this is another great momentum building, jumping off place. But to be fair to the building industry and the property owners, we are going to have to start talking about giving them the roadmap when a potential buyer comes into our region. The first thing they do is, if they're smart, they talk to people in the planning world, and they look at the future land use map, and they look at the zoning code, and they look at the comprehensive planning that we've put on top of that. And that's what gives them the either go, no-go, red light, green light, yellow light decision-making that any smart developer would go through in order to decide that they're going to put a contract on a piece of land. And then they do the due diligence for stormwater, opportunities and all the other constraints that particular property might put into the mix of whether they're going to buy the property or not. We don't want to be known as a community that gets a developer sucked in here, not knowing that when they buy a piece of property, we're going to say, it's in a wet zone, you can't build there. It's in an ecological zone, you can't build except with a certain building technology. We have to be upfront as a community, because that's how we're going to be known as strong and fair and dynamic and future-oriented. So I think what we do tonight is a great start, and we're going to need to change this document so that it really does work for the building community and work for the people that we're pledged to help protect their particular special flood hazard areas. But we're not done. So come back in 2020 and let's start talking about the master plan and the land use that we know we all have to be shepherding through in the year ahead.
Councilmember Shade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Madam Clerk. I want to be very clear about this, and I want this to be well-spoken and everybody understand my position. I am not opposed to a build and fill restriction. I want everybody to understand that. Now, I'll have to say it 100 times if I need to, but I am not opposed to a restriction on build and fill. Now, I've sat on this committee with Councilmember White and Councilmember Jackson on the revisions to the stormwater manual. And for anybody to make an accusation that I did not want this to be discussed is inaccurate. Because I know that this stormwater manual is coming before us in very short order, and Matt just mentioned to us, coming in November. This build and fill restriction is included and incorporated in those revisions to that manual. And this is the problem with how this process is working. Councilmember Moody hit nail right on the head with this. We've got to avoid causing damage to what we want to do with this thing, because this is important. And as Councilmember Griffin, you pointed out those particular areas that need special attention and special love and special care where this was going to apply, like in Church Creek and other areas like on Johns Island. And this restriction, and I disagree with Mr. Fountain on one thing, the stormwater manual is going to be restrictive. And I think it's going to be highly restrictive. So I want this to be discussed. I want this to come before everybody. We've had these discussions with the folks who are engaged into this process, including the engineers who have wrestled with this thing. We don't want to create two different standards, and that's my concern with this, because I think that if we pass this ordinance as written and don't make the amendments that have been discussed around this chamber today, and then we have a stormwater manual that is in opposition to that, we're going to create more of a problem that we're trying to avoid. We need to have this restriction on build and fill. I agree with that 100%. Let's be just careful and surgical on how we apply it and where we apply it to make sure that we're doing the things that we want to do with protecting our land, protecting our community, and to do the things that we're intending to do with this restriction. But I am not opposed to build and fill.
Would anybody else like to be heard? You've already been heard. Someone who hadn't been heard yet, Mitchell and then Lewis.
I think our attorney explained well, so whatever we do tonight, excuse me, you're getting like Gregory.
I did recognize Councilmember Mitchell first.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yes,
excuse
sir.
me, I thought he said Lewis.
He may defer to you.
Go ahead.
Yeah. You're our senior member. He's deferring to you.
I certainly agree with our attorney. Whatever we do here tonight will not take no effect on our property owners or any building permits that have been issued or will be issued in the future. But we have to start somewhere, and I think this is a good way to start. It's not an ordinance, will not be an ordinance. We just need to make some revisions to what we have and see what we could work with. We've done it before, and I think the heads around this table, we could do it. We could sit here and talk another 10 hours, and we probably won't get nothing done tonight. But let's come back with some suggestions.
We wanted to have a thorough conversation. That's what we're doing. Yes, sir. Councilmember Mitchell.
Well, Councilmember Lewis spoke before I did, so that was some of the things I was going to say. But I sat here and I said, and I was thinking, I must be went to the wrong school or something. The schooling I went to, New York University, might be taught me something differently. I don't know. But we sit around this table, we sit around, and everybody's saying the same thing over and over and over again to you, my colleagues. Why? If we hear something before, why are we going to go back and say the same thing somebody else is saying and just repeat and repeat and repeating? I think we have more education than that. We sat here, we're talking about giving a first reading. If we give a first reading, we said we have to critique it and do some other things with it. It's not something that's being approved tonight. So we can sit here and talk all night long. This one going to talk, that one going to talk. What are we solving? Not a thing. So let's go home and vote, give it first reading, let's work on it, get it right, and move on. People are watching us on this YouTube or whatever, and say, they're a bunch of clowns sitting up here. Look at this, saying the same thing over and over again. Nobody making a decision. And I'm sitting here just looking. I said, my education went down the drain. So I'm sitting here looking, that's why I don't never really say anything, because I hear the same thing over and over again. I don't want to repeat the same thing over and again, so I just listen. But we have to move on. Move on. That's called for the question, let's move on.
Member Seeking? Oh, okay.
Briefly, so if you actually, for those who've listening us debate this, if you actually go look at this ordinance, there is 7 paragraphs in the introductory portion of it that says whereas, which is sort of the setup for the punchline, right? And there's 1 paragraph of technical requirements. And I just want to read, and I actually had tagged the same pages that Councilmember Griffin did from the Dutch dialogues, but just to go back to the whereas, to sort of bolster that, there's 2 paragraphs I think are important for people in here to know sort of what the setup for this was, not just a council member bringing this forward, but some things that went along with this. 1, whereas the city has recently engaged in a series of public meetings, lots of them, focus groups and consulting sessions with civic leaders, stakeholders, flooding experts, known as the Dutch dialogues, to research, explore, design, and propose integrated ways to mitigate and adapt to flood conditions affecting the city. That's a big statement, and it talks about us doing a whole bunch of stuff. Secondly, whereas the Dutch dialogue sessions included significant discussion on the negative impacts of fill, which you've heard about tonight in their report, which resulted in an overall recommendation in the Dutch dialogues, Charleston's final report for the city to adopt measures to reduce the negative impacts of fill. That's almost correct. What it really did is it resulted in a series of recommendations to adopt a series of measures to reduce the impacts of fill. So the whereas is great. This is, and I think we talked about this today, this really is more of a proclamation than it is an ordinance. It's a proclamation that we've received this information. We spent an enormous amount of time on it. There's a series of recommendations in there that we need to take to heart. We need to identify those. Johns Island was a distinct area where they actually identified different zones based on location, geography, elevation. It's complicated. There's no one size fits all. So whatever we give a reading to tonight is a proclamation that we have taken the Dutch dialogues. We've accepted that we have a now challenge to go and adopt into our codes, our building codes, and our planning, things that take into consideration, including fill and all that, but we need to integrate it. I mean, we haven't heard from Mr. Lindsay tonight. He's our planning director. We need to get him involved. So I don't really know where this goes forward, but I do believe whatever the vote is tonight, and it seems that it's going to be positive, read the first whereas sections of this ordinance, which is essentially a proclamation that says the Dutch dialogues hit it, got it right. Let's go and implement it in a way that not one size fits all in the city, a number of sizes fits all. And look, everyone here came tonight to speak that we have to do something. They're right. We have to do something. The Dutch have set the roadmap. This is a start, a proclamation, not an end, and that's where we're heading with this. So, we just can't forget it and put it on the shelf. Whatever happens tonight, the work starts tonight on all this.
Member Gregory.
Right. I view the whereas as a preamble to the ordinance. That is an ordinance. It's a preamble.
Right.
This is not a proclamation. Secondly, I think that staff has done an unbelievable job on the ordinance portion of this piece, because we have outs. It's flexible enough for us to implement, okay, in such a way to address much of what we've said here. I mean, I'm ready to vote. I mean, staff did a great job on crafting it. I think thank legal for it. But the whereas is the preamble. There is an ordinance here.
But anybody who hasn't been heard, like to be heard?
Well, I just wanted to say that I wanted to take the motion as I made it without the amendments.
All right. I don't think the amendments ever got made. I entertained an amendment, and no one, that's correct. And you were never asked to agree because no one ever took up no one made the amendment. So, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right.
Mr. Mayor,
continue with your report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you all would think, I hope we all think that discussion was worth being held and wasn't ended at the Public Works Committee meeting, because all you all were deserving of being heard. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to step off and let the Vice Chair take the meeting from here. The report on Carolina Waste, obviously go back up to B and go through. And I appreciate y'all letting me leave the meeting a little bit earlier. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hope you have a good evening.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we had since we had an elongated version of B last time around, we get the Cliff Notes version this time. So at your pleasure, if Mr. Fountain wants to come up and give maybe a 2-minute report, 2 minutes, because we really didn't talk about B that much. We had pretty much already got through everything.
Item B.
Yes, thank you. So just, again, very, very briefly, we had the two National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Emergency Coastal Resilience Fund grant applications, which were voted on previously. That's the application in the Church Creek area to do a renaturalization project for flood storage and resiliency, and then the planning grant application in Johns Island to evaluate areas where we could basically do restoration projects or do preservation projects to improve stormwater in that basin as well. We then had the two low battery project awards, items 3 and 4. That was for the contract to Gulfstream for the actual construction of the low battery, as well as the professional services amendment for the construction phase professional services for JMT. We also had the West Ashley Circle Connector Road. That's the connector road again between Grand Oaks Boulevard and the West Ashley Circle for design by Kimley Horn and Associates. We just briefly touched on the stormwater fee, saying that Ms. Wharton is continuing to work with CWS on developing a plan for a fee assistance program. And then we did touch upon the stormwater design standards manual update, specifically talking about some of the fill requirements and how that interacts with the manual.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Then we had a quick report on Carolina Waste. We only touched on it briefly because the superintendent, Matt Altop, was out. He'll be back for our next meeting. We just kind of talked about some of the services and some of the issues that we've been having, and we will continue that discussion at the next meeting. All the items under B and CI were for information only, and I would ask for the adoption of the report. I'd move for that.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Now we'll step back to Committee on Public Safety. Councilmember Shade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to go through this as quickly as we possibly can. We received a report from Amy Barch on the turning leaf program. Currently, there are 55 men in her program. 50 are City of Charleston employees. She has a reincarceration rate of only 7% and a rearrest rate of only 22%. We then moved on to a report from Ms. Cofield, who is the court director for our municipal court. All three of our municipal court judges were present, Judges Morrison, Maloney, and Flores. And let me just get to the meat of this report. And this is somewhat stark and alarming, what I'm about to report to you. While they gave us an overall review of how the municipal court is operating and some of the nuances of that, the main part of this was that as of August of 2019, as of August of 2019, there are 542 pending jury trial cases. 542 pending jury trial cases, which also includes an additional 167 DUI trials pending. In other words, if we tried a case a week, it would take about 10 years to get rid of all those jury trial requests. We have requested that they come back with a report and with specific proposals on how to reduce that number of jury trials that are pending out there. They are stemming from arrests that occurred back in 2016. That's 3 years worth of arrest. We asked them to come back in 30 days with specific proposals to reduce that number. That number I gave you takes into consideration there are no new arrests and no new jury trial requests. So we hope to get a report back from them within 30 days of that. We did not receive a report on the racial bias audit, and we did not take up the item number D on an ordinance to amend the responsibilities. Those will be deferred to our next meeting. We did vote on item number E, which is an ordinance that Ms. Zimmerman had discussed earlier about reporting. She has recommended that we change the language of that, the driver of a vehicle involved in a collision or crash as opposed to accident. But we did report that to be approved by council. So I would make that recommendation that we approve the amendment on item number E on the section, chapter 19, section 71.
All right. We have a second. Any discussion? Councilmember Seekings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for fellow council members to know, that meeting with the clerk of court and the judges lasted almost 2 hours. We were there on a Friday afternoon, and they gave us a report. It was the first report we'd ever received as a committee or in city council from the clerk of our municipal court since, when did they say?
1991.
1991. And they were happy to be there. They weren't coming there reluctantly. They had things to tell us. And the message was loud and clear that they need help, and they've got some issues over there. And as you know, Mr. Mayor, and this is not new, it's something I've talked about for 10 years, and I'm going to continue to talk about it, particularly following this meeting, is we need to have some outlet at the city, not to call balls and strikes in the city court, but to oversee the administration of it and give them the help that they need. We need a committee to do that. And I think that one of the things that will probably come from our 30-day report going forward is that. I mean, just the idea that there's 167, this is just DUI cases, not all cases, that are backlogged on the jury trial docket. It could take 10 years to clear that. That should be alarming to all of us and our citizens too. It was an interesting Friday afternoon for sure. And I think everybody left there with a takeaway that we need to do something, and this council is going to have to get involved. So I want to thank the chairman for having the meeting. I want to thank the clerk and her staff for coming and giving us a very comprehensive report. They gave us a PowerPoint. If you haven't seen it, take a look at it. It really goes through the numbers. The numbers are huge. The cases that run through there are massive. And we just need to, for help, not for hindrance, for help to keep an eye on what goes on over there so we can give them the resources that they need to succeed. Because look, the chief is here. I mean, every incident that goes on, an arrest that the chief's team makes of someone who's violated the code of ordinances in the city of Charleston, if those cases don't go anywhere by virtue of the fact that time goes by, years and years and years, it is essentially time that has been not well spent by our police force. And they are in the law enforcement business, and it's a cooperative effort, and it doesn't end with the police. It starts the process, and we've now found out that that process is hitting a dead stop and not going through the system where it should. And that was, to me, eye-opening, and that's a kind way of putting it. So look forward to that 30-day report. Thank you, Chief, for your input. The Chief gave some very pointed remarks in his input, and I think they were well made and totally appropriate, totally appropriate. So let's keep an eye on it. That's our job. And I thank Corporation Counsel too. She was in there and she explained some of these challenges that they've got there too. There's challenges there, and our job is to make sure we help them meet those. So thank you.
Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Councilmember Seekings. I have no knowledge of everything that you were just talking about, and so thank you to the chairman for bringing the representatives of the court so that you could hear, you know, how we need to be making improvements. I'm actually just wondering, when you put forward the ordinance to amend Chapter 19, Councilmember Shade, are you saying we should change the accident language to crash and collision?
Yeah, I think that probably that would be fine with me if we want to do that.
I would totally agree with that.
You want to just add them, have it still say accident, crash, or collision?
That would be fine. It helps clarify a little bit.
I would like the opportunity for legal counsel to review that, because that language on accident actually comes from the state law.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that we are not somehow contradicting the state law by changing that language that was suggested. So if we could just defer.
Okay, we'll just give it first reading.
We'll give it first reading, and we'll come back on second reading.
Let's just keep it as is for first reading. We
Yes,
can
sir.
change it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Councilmember Moody?
Yeah, I was wondering on this.
Keep it as the word accident.
Councilmember Moody?
This ordinance, it says, or other property, if you run over a garbage can, does that mean you're supposed to report that? Who's supposed to report it?
The person who ran over it.
Huh?
The person who did it, the driver of the car.
If there's injury or death of a person.
I'm trying to figure out what the purpose.
If you hurt a trash can, you don't have to report it.
In this it says you do. Yeah, or other property.
says other property damage, and if you're dead, are you supposed to report it to them?
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out what the problem here is, what we're trying to solve.
The problem was the pedicab that was hit, and the pedicab did not fit the state statute or our ordinance that there had to be a report. So the person was able to essentially have a hit and run without consequence. And that was a problem. And that person could have been seriously injured.
So the problem is, in this particular case, and with that pedicab, it was a hit and run.
Right.
And that's not...
not covered by the way it's written now.
That's not, a hit and run is not a crime?
Well, because the way that the ordinance is currently written did not cover a pedicab.
So the person that hit the cab is required to report it?
Right, the idea of this is this. In a collision, that there's something happened, something went wrong. Somebody was either violated a stoplight, or they were speeding, or maybe they were under the influence. We don't know. So if they have a collision and cause harm or damage to anybody, you want them to stop and make the report about that, because that way you can investigate what transpired. So in the event that that person was under the influence of something, that could ratchet up the offense level to what they may be held responsible for. If they have no obligation to report, they can just get off scot-free. And that's the problem.
I'm just trying to understand what the...
Councilmember Griffin and then Lewis.
Technically, the way it's written, if I back out of my driveway and I bump my neighbor's trash can, I got to call the cops, or else I'm breaking the law. We got to have some sort of common sense to this thing to make sure.
Councilmember Lewis.
I think we're dealing with two different things here. Home rule gives the cities the authority to write ordinances. As long as our ordinance don't supersede the state law, then we within our rights. So is this superseding with whatever the state statute says? Because we can't go over the state statute. If the state statute says you have to, don't have to report it. That's my question. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. We need to report things when it happens.
I just wanted to point out one thing quickly to the council, and that is that this is an exact duplication of the state law. This law already exists. By the city adopting this ordinance, what it would allow the city to do is to write a municipal code violation. So it would expedite and allow the city to address these situations without having to go through the state law. We could just do it on a municipal level. So that would be the need for that.
Could someone then, in this particular case, could they have brought a charge under state law?
Yes.
That would have been a solution to what we're doing here.
I have to clarify that, because the problem
Steve, you got to get close.
Yeah, the problem we ran into with the state statute was that a pedicab does not meet the definition of a vehicle. And therefore, unless there was an injury to the pedicab driver, the state statute did not require that you immediately stop and report it. So what we've done is we've closed that loophole. As to the point of whether hitting a garbage can on the way out of your driveway, that would not apply to this. You still have to report that within 24 hours, damage to property. But this talks about a vehicle driven or attended by a person, or other device driven or attended by a person. So it's only if you hit a car, a bike, a moped, anything of that sort. So it doesn't apply to hitting a tree or a garbage can or anything else. So.
All right, any further discussion? No, I think we're going to pass it as is. If they're going to look at any ramifications of editing the words and come back before second reading.
Well, we're going to leave accident in there, right? We're just going to add.
I'll leave accident in there.
We're going to leave it as is for first reading.
Right. Chief?
I would just kind of repeat what's already been said. Councilmember Seegans, I think, articulated we have people in our community who are dying from impaired driving, collisions, There's a lot we can do about it. There's a lot we are doing about it. There's a lot more we're going to be doing about it. Impaired driving is a significant problem in this country, in this state, and in particular in our city. We are investing a lot in our police officers, in-car video cameras, mobile data computers, training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of time is tied up in this type of enforcement. A lot of time is tied up in administrative hearings, in court hearings, and continuances. What we heard in this meeting surprised me in a way that the backup is significant. The way that the laws are written, the legislature here, anybody can do a jury demand, and we're not following up on those cases. When you look at the fact that it was stated it could take a week to prepare for and prosecute a DWI case, if there's 167 pending, and that's of 544 total, but just the DWI cases, if there's 52 weeks in a year, that's more than 3 years just to do the existing cases.
If we do one every single...
If you did one every week. So it's a problem because those same people are on our roadways. Some of them have multiple prior convictions. Some of them are on our roadways. We just had a snafu at the General Sessions Court level. It's a separate issue. But the young girl, Selma, who was killed, who was visiting here with her family from Denmark at Rutledge and Calhoun on the sidewalk with her family members, that person who was, his trial is pending, it may still take a couple years to hear that case, was out and had certain restrictions as part of that and was doing cocaine and other things and violated and was out for 6 months. Now that person's back in jail. I only use that as an example because we have to pay attention to these issues. It was a very revealing meeting. There's, I think, a 30-day follow-up. I'm interested, I know the mayor, I know the council is interested in seeing what those recommendations are. We have to do better. It's a significant problem that affects our community and the safety of our communities. And we've got to do a lot better.
Thank you, sir. All right, the motion on the floor is
Adopt the report with the ordinance.
adopt the ordinance. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Any further report? Councilmember Shade, thank you. Now we go to our Committee on Traffic and Transportation. Councilmember Seekings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Committee on Traffic and Transportation met today at 2:30. We had a number of items. The first actually was deferred, which is the Town of James Island, Clearview and Eastwood Neighborhood Traffic Calming Project. We're going to hear that at our next meeting. Ms. Cabanis was not available. We got a report from Eric Adams from the, it wasn't Eric Adams actually, it was Mr. Nims from the county about the CTC traffic calming program on Burkler Drive and Rainbow Road. I believe of the devices that are going up, 4 of them, only 1 was actually in the city. Although this is a cooperative effort between the city and the county, funded by the county, we did adopt unanimously the plan to install traffic calming devices in the city part of that project. And I think that probably will need the approval of this council, although it's not going to cost us any money unless I missed something. I think that's fine. Oh, that's right. We don't need it. So anyway, we did approve 1 of the 4 from the city. I think we also made it clear that the county needs to make sure that the city residents, who I think live in Councilmember Jackson's district, be alerted as to when those devices are going in front of their houses. Gotcha, Councilmember Gregory. Well, you can report to him because he left. We got an update on the food vendor ordinance, which really didn't tell us a whole lot of anything other than we may be abandoning the food vendor ordinance. More to come after the first of the year. So sit tight. I know you'll be on the edges of your seat for that one. Then we had 2 updates. One was on the TNC companies, that Ubers and the like in the commercial district, particularly on King Street. Councilmember Griffin asked for it, and thank you for doing that. Lieutenant King, actually, who used to be in that district, now is in West Ashley. He's now your lieutenant. He's excellent. Well, he took time out of his day to come and report to us. And essentially what he told us is the program that we have in place that we adopted in 2015 is working very well. And he does not recommend any adjustments to it. Essentially what it does is it maps out an area in the most dense portion of King Street that between 12:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. there are pickup zones for the TNCs that aren't right in the middle of the street. right in the middle of the street was creating problems, actually public safety problems. So if there's any specific questions, happy to answer them, but the recommendation from Lieutenant King was to keep that program in place, that it's working. So, sure, happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Griffin?
Taxi cabs have to follow that program?
Yeah, everybody has to follow that rule. That is universal for everybody, taxi cabs and TNCs. The next report we got was at the request of Councilmember Lewis, which was seconded by me very loudly, and that is on golf carts. So, Councilmember Lewis, here's what we received in terms of report on what the rules of the road are today in the city of Charleston as adopted by the state, which we follow the state rules. And my legal team is going to tell me when I run afoul. But the rules are as follows. You can operate a golf cart in the city of Charleston if you operate it within 2 miles of your home. You do not operate it on any road where speed limit is 35 miles or greater. You can operate in daylight only, no nighttime operations. You must be over the age of 16, insured, and registered. Now, it gets interesting from there. Unless you have a licensed low-speed vehicle, we really don't know who you are unless you register your golf cart. And one of the things that has come up in our committee, and it comes up on the streets every day, is there are people operating golf carts in the city of Charleston in violation of a number of these provisions of the state law, but not the least of which is the registration provision. And if a golf cart is not licensed as a low-speed vehicle and is not registered in accordance with the registration provisions of state law, we have no way to identify the owner/driver of that golf cart. Now, when they're a moving violation, we can get them. But where it really becomes difficult is when they park them in zones like in front of a fire hydrant, in a loading zone, or just at a meter where other people have to pay their $2 an hour. So we're going to take that up. We've taken it up before and not come up with many solutions, but golf carts were something, and I think Lieutenant King, who sat into this too, recognized that we've got some issues, and it's citywide. It's not just on the peninsula. It's all over the place. Golf carts are an accident waiting to happen. So those are the basic rules, Councilmember Lewis. Happy to answer any questions. We are going to take this up again after the first of the year to see if there's some things we can do at the city level to enhance this ordinance and enhance these rules, particularly when it comes to operations and parking. But those are the rules as they exist currently. So, Mr. Mayor, I see there's some hands up. I'm happy to answer
Member
questions.
Shealy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to ask you, Councilman Seekings, when you say registered, you're just talking about registering with the DMV.
Yeah, that's correct. You do not have to register with a license plate. You have to register the actual vehicle as property, essentially.
When I vacationed this past summer at Edisto, you had to be registered there. You had to be registered with the state, but they also had a register. It was very simple. You walk in, you show that you have your registration, you show that you have your that you're insured and all that, and they give you a sticker to put on that golf cart. But you have to be registered with Edisto Beach as well as the state, and it may just be a recommendation that we can have.
Well, first,
there.
I want to congratulate you on having a vacation. I'd love to have one of those.
I took it at Edisto Beach so I could get back and forth.
But also, thank you for keeping your eyes open as a good municipal person would as what goes on. And I think that's probably where we're headed, because it's a way of us identifying who owns that piece of property, which essentially it is, and they end up in all sorts of places around the city. So more to come on that, and we can certainly look. I'm looking at our legal counsel to Edisto and other places. Not that we want to make more and more rules, but we have a huge gap currently in where we have our ability to attend to things that are improper. So with that report, I don't think we need to adopt anything for information purposes only.
All right. So, Councilmember Lewis.
I just want to thank y'all for taking it up. Sure. You've addressed some of the stuff that I was concerned about. But I can tell you in my neighborhood, they just don't drive around in the day, they drive around at night. They got the baby in this arm.
Dog.
And sitting on the lap of a dog, and they got a can of beer in their hand. And I mean, they just, but...
well, I think...
something that we got to continue to work on.
And thank you, Member. Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. I think one of the things that was very clear to all of us in the committee today is we do have a gap in, first off, understanding what the rules of the road are. Now we know them. And secondly, with some enforcement. And we got a report that there's been guarded enforcement, and we'll probably have to talk some more to our police department about that. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that report. Next is our Committee on Ways and Means. Councilmember White.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye.
Bills up for second reading. We have just 1, 2, and 3.
Second.
Got a
Okay.
second. Any discussion on any of those? Councilmember Jackson.
I will vote to approve, but on number 1, the ordinance to, and I'm sorry I didn't bring this up when we were giving the business license ordinance first reading. I know that you were at a session that I was at, Mr. Mayor, at the regional gathering of the Municipal Association. Were you there, Councilmember Moody, too? And they talked about how they're going to make a big push across the state to sort of uniform the business license process and the collection process in particular, so that it becomes more amenable to the municipal side of the collection, as opposed to the state trying to take over. And I don't remember all the details, but it was basically there's safety in numbers, that if the municipalities do it the same way, then the state legislature wouldn't have the same argument that we're not doing it well. And so I know that Charleston has been out in front in terms of having our own way of collections and, tracking and all of that. But I was wondering if our CFO had ever really thought, or whoever's in charge of it, I'm assuming it's Ms. Wharton's office, if we'd ever really given it any thought about whether we should join in with the rest of the municipalities.
Councilmember Jackson, we have looked at that in the past, and to tell you the truth, some of the rates and categories that the Municipal Association is promoting are inconsistent with what the city does, and frankly, we feel we garner more revenue through our individual specialized look at things. We'll take a look at it again, but certainly the last time we did look at it, we had some concerns that we frankly thought the fiscal impact would be negative on the city if we signed up to what the Municipal Association was promoting. But we'll look at it again.
All right. Councilmember Moody.
Yeah, I think my recollection was they were trying to get consistency, and having practiced in that area for many years, I don't know how, you said you may lose some revenue, but if you're out of balance with some of the other municipalities, I know I could figure out how to report it in another, for example, if I'm practicing accounting, my office is downtown, and I'm doing your return, and you live in Somerville, I can report that revenue to Somerville and just avoid the whole thing. So, there's all kinds of ways that you could manipulate it, and what they were trying to do was kind of get it uniform, because we got so many different rules around. So, something we ought to look at.
We'll look at it again.
Right.
But unfortunately, I think part of their making it uniform was also going to take some of our revenue away, so we're very concerned about it.
I don't want to send any money to Columbia thinking I'm going to get some of it back.
Right.
Always lose.
That's right. So we have a motion for items 1, 2, and 3. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Now for third reading ratification. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it.
And Mayor, I'd just like to say one thing, just to put it on the record. When we did the Ways and Means report, that did include 2 ordinances that we have approved.
Absolutely. And then we had an item under second readings, number 12.
That's correct.
To be withdrawn. Can I get a motion to withdraw number 12?
Withdrawn.
So moved. And a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any further business to come before us tonight? Councilmember Moody?
But can I ask you a question? At our last meeting, you made a comment about the sidewalk by automobile dealer on Betsy Road, that we had gotten some money from that. Did they actually give us some money in lieu of that? I thought we just passed on that whole thing. Or maybe I misunderstood what you were saying.
Yeah, he was supposed to, we agreed on a number. He had a quote done, and he agreed to pay through the TRC process some funds to be able to start the sidewalk across the street.
We will earmark that then, if we can maybe use that money as seed money for sidewalks.
On the other side of the street.
Well, anywhere. I would like it on the other side, but but I thought that he had not done anything, but you're saying he did pay.
I mean, I hadn't verified the check came in yet or anything
Yeah, I'm
like
not-
that, but,
Okay,
my understanding is he agreed to pay.
thank you.
Any further business? Councilmember Shealy.
Just more, Madam Clerk, just one thing. I think the Committee on Public Works met at 5 o'clock and it said 4 in our agenda. I don't know if that's a big deal, but wanted to bring it to your attention.
All right. Any further business? All right, y'all, we stand adjourned.